Welcome, everyone. It's now 6:30, and we'll begin open session. Marilyn, do we have any agenda-related comments? No. All right, so we'll go right to the agenda. No speakers, so we can. Okay. Our first agenda item is facilities, and we'll begin with the construction change order. Brian Stashak.
Thank you, Vice President Kelly. So, I just wanted to...
Real quickly, just to confirm, is everyone's mic on? We want to make sure just make sure the green light's on, because that will pick up the live stream. I just want to make sure of that. We're good. Sorry.
All right, thank you. So this may be the first time that some in this group are seeing a construction change order. So I just briefly wanted to talk that through and what that is. You will see these on all of our projects. They are not always increases to cost. Sometimes they're decreases to cost. And in this particular case, however, we have an increase in cost. And I can tell you this is fairly common with asbestos removal projects, because what ultimately happens is we will go through the project thoroughly, obviously with our consultant, prior to bidding a project. They put the bid specifications together. And then we find asbestos that was behind walls, behind things that we couldn't see, and once we tear those out, we see it, and then we have to remove it. Again, you'll see these generally with every one of our contracts, not just the asbestos removal contracts, but with any of the renovation contracts, because what ultimately ends up happening, again, the same thing occurs with these. Sometimes there's additions, but sometimes there's also subtractions as well, because we have allowances built into contracts, and if we don't need those allowances, then that becomes a deductive change order to the total contract amount. But in this case, as you can see, there's a list on page 5 and page 6 of the two change orders that are for Great Western abatement. And so you can see that the first change order is for $24,261 of additional work. And then change order number 2 is for $2,378 worth of additional work. And so the original contract amount was $55,511. And these two change orders now bring the total contract amount to $82,150. Typically what we do with these is we do bring them to, anytime we have a change order, either increases or decreases the amount of contract, we bring them to the board so the board is aware of them. And of course we ask the board to approve them. So again, this is work that had to be done at the time as we find it. We have no choice, we have to get it done, and that's what we're doing here as well. Be happy to answer any questions on any of this for you.
I think you confirmed my only question, which was, did it pertain to an increase in scope as opposed to a poor bid where the hours estimate was low and they took more time? No, it was, we needed to expand the scope. It's asbestos. Once you're in there, you got to deal with it. So
that's exactly
okay.
right. Yeah, and typically with these bid specs, what we will do is we'll also put in essentially rates for additional things that we find. So we know what they're charging up front. It's not just a blanket, okay, here we want to make some dollar amount. Now, of course, the hours, we have to estimate those and that sort of thing, but that's exactly right. It's not because of anything that was bad in the bid other than the fact that you find some additional asbestos. And it's one of the frustrating parts about running construction projects, because you can only do so much, because you can't tear apart an entire classroom wall and say, okay, we finally found all the asbestos, now let's bid it. You can't do that until you get into it. So there's some estimates involved.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, no other questions? So that will go to, next week, right?
That's right. So yeah, at next Monday night's board meeting, we would ask the board to formally approve these change orders number 1 and 2 for Great Western abatement. And again, we will have many more of these as we get through the rest of the contracts here for the remaining parts of the projects that are still out there.
Okay. We definitely want to see more decreases than increases. But.
That's my goal as well, Paul. So.
The next agenda items under facilities is the FY23 potential summer capital projects. Brian Stashak.
Thank you again, Vice President Kelly. So we talked about these back in June. June was our first look at some of our projects for the summer of 2023. And as you know, we had a rather extensive list of projects for this current summer that we are currently wrapping up. Most things have gone well this summer, and most things are continuing to go well. We are wrapping up all of these projects. We do anticipate a delay in one project, which is across the street here in the tech wing of the Vaughn building, because again, while putting in some new flooring over there, we found some additional asbestos that was buried. And so we have to get that removed, and we're working on that. We anticipate that'll be done within the next week and a half, but we still think we're on time, right, Paul, on schedule? To get that done for the start of school?
Yes.
Okay,
So we're just on track. So
Yeah.
it'll be tight, but I think we'll make it.
yeah. So the rest of our projects are, again, from this summer are going fairly well at this point, which is good. We have to wrap them up, obviously, because we'll be starting school here in the next couple of weeks. That being said, as you recall, one of our projects from this summer was moved to next summer, and that was the replacement of the air handling units at the field house here at North Campus due to a delay in delivery for those 9 air handling units. And as you recall, those 9 air handling units they heat the facility, but will also air condition the facility next year once those are installed as well. We could not move on with that project this year. Originally, we had delivery scheduled for July of those air handling units. We got pushed to September, October. I think now we're into November.
We are into November, you're correct.
We're into November. And again, those are supply chain issues, that sort of thing. And we could not demo the existing air handling units because those heat that facility as well. So we had to push that project to next summer. So ultimately, any costs associated with that project has been moved into next summer's work at this point. We still anticipate a similar timeline, probably shutting that facility down mid-May of 2023, and then keeping it closed until probably mid-September of 2023 in order to finish up that project. So probably about 4 months. And we'll have more discussion with the timeline as we go, because we're going to obviously have some time to do that. There may also be some increased costs with that, because if they deliver these air handling units in November, as they say they will, I don't know, we'll see. We're going to probably have to store them, and so there'll be some cost for some storage. There's also going to be some increases potentially for labor costs throughout next year. Those are the kinds of things we're going to have to talk through, and we'll get that information to the board. But at this point, there's no discussion on that. Additionally,
Brian, I'm sorry, that's not listed on that spreadsheet, right? That item?
no, that is not. Yeah, that is not listed because that project is already approved and well on its way.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay.
Sure. So then looking toward the summer of 2023 for our additional projects and new projects for that summer. A couple of factors here that we were looking at. First of all, we get together, myself, Brad Drake, Paul Guida, our architect, also Ed Wright from DLA Architects, and we start looking at, again, we keep in mind our facilities plan, the one that we have currently in place. We also, Brad has his input in terms of where are the areas in most of need right now that we're seeing where we have the most cost involved with maintenance, where are these items at the end of their useful life. And so we kind of put this list together, and as you can see, the list is extensive, quite frankly, for the district. Yet that being the case, as you can see in yellow on the top of page 8, we really have sort of the 4 projects that we're really recommending for this coming summer. And those 4, as you can see, again, we talked about all of these in June. The north end of North Campus, the clay tile roof replacement, that is one of the roofs that is oldest and probably most problematic in the district. It also offers us the opportunity to avoid a roof replacement that involves insulation, because insulation for flat roofs, which we have on most of our South Campus facilities, is hard to come by these days, and the pricing is extremely high as well. And so if we had a roof that maybe a year or 2 ago would have cost us about $1 million, we're probably $1.5 million to $2 million at this particular point. So there's not a whole lot of value there. However, with the clay tile roofs, because we don't have to look at that insulation issue, we're avoiding that and probably avoiding any delays in that project. So that's one of the recommendations there. On line 4, you'll see the North Campus library air handling unit. So what exactly is going on here? Well, that unit is very old. I think it's about 60, is it 60 years old? I forget how old it is. 1969 is the year on that air handling unit. And so it has failed a number of times. And Brad, why don't you explain? I know you had it repaired. Was it last year? And Okay.
Coil of that unit is shot, and it's continuing to hemorrhage food, essentially. So we just brought in Hayes Mechanical and put several $1,000s into it. Hayes Mechanical said, pretty much said, you can't call this system anymore. There's not much else we can do. So the unit is at the very end.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. And so that's why this one rises to the top. Now, this is already existing air conditioning in the facility. And so what's important about that is we want to make sure that we maintain that, because that facility, the library, is used when we have the real hot days here at North Campus as a room where classes can be moved into those library classrooms. And so we certainly don't want to lose that cooling in that space. And so that's why this one has risen to the top of that list as well. On line number 5, we have the LTTV studio, which also is an air-conditioned facility, and that particular air handling unit also is near its useful life and requiring more frequent maintenance. Obviously, the cost is a little bit less because it's just that one area, the one studio, but really for the equipment, the technical equipment that is down there, you really do have to have sort of an air-conditioned facility to maintain that equipment, and that's why that area was air-conditioned in the first place. So we've also had a number of issues with that one, and that one itself also needs to be replaced. And then finally, we've talked about this at length and heard about this, the video scoreboard for the South Campus pool. So back when we initially talked about what was going on with that scoreboard, we, of course, had recommended, we talked about, replacing it. We know that replacing the scoreboard there is probably, if we ordered today, probably a 6-month lead time as well, because of the electronic equipment in that video board. And so we looked at repairing, and we thought we were going to be able to repair the existing scoreboard. We had contacted Sievert Electric, who does essentially the distribution installation of Daktronic scoreboards, which is what we have. And they thought that they would be able to repair it as well. A week and a half ago, we were informed that they were not going to be able to repair it. So that really leaves us with kind of 3 options temporarily of what we're going to do. We're going to see, number 1, if we can move. We talked about the scores for swimming being an issue. We're going to look to see if we can move, and they confirmed that this can be done. We just have to see, hopefully, that it will work, that there's modules, video modules within the current board. We're hoping that we can move those around so that the best ones will reflect the scores, and we won't have distorted scores for swimming and, for the other events that are there. That's our hope, number 1. Number 2 is that we do have the old timing system here at North Campus that we used to use when we had swim meets here. We do not have swim meets here any longer, but there is the possibility we could repurpose that temporarily for this year. Let me take a step back. All of these would be temporary just for this coming year. That we would have, obviously, the new board for next year. And so potentially repurposing of the North Campus board is possible as well. And the third and final option would be that we put up a temporary scoreboard. The temporary would most likely be in the line, literally along the lines of a 1-line kind of scoreboard that would show, once a swim race is over, for example, it would show each score, but you'd only see them one at a time. So at least you could read them. But anyway, so we're going to obviously look into one of those 3 options for the temporary for this year. And then, of course, the recommendation at this point would be to go ahead and purchase that new board and really get that ordered here as quickly as we can, because as they're telling us, if you ordered today, you're probably looking at January, and who knows what tomorrow brings under these current circumstances. So my recommendation would be that we get that on the order here as quickly as we can, and then we look to install that. I don't know that there would be any opportunity to install it during the current school year. We can always look at that and see if that's a possibility to remove that temporary board or whatever we have going on there. The worst case scenario is that it would be up and running, obviously, next summer. So, but we can certainly look to see if somehow delivery is earlier than expected. Maybe the winter break, maybe the spring break, something along those lines would be a possibility. I don't know, but that's something we still obviously have to order and get that going. So essentially at this point, we're probably talking about, when you look at those 4 projects, you look at architect fees, potential asbestos removal, probably in the ballpark of $3 to $3.5 million of projects for that next summer. I do think one of the pieces of this is that, when we look at next year's work, where I'm always looking at, what was the surplus from, this current year's budget, and can that be utilized? And of course, it can be. We still have a lot of moving parts in last year's financials. And because of the construction work that we have going on, we closed the year on June 30th this year, as we do every year. And we still have, if I just look at the general ledger right now, we still have over $2 million worth of construction payments that we still have to add back into last year's budget, last year's financials. So we're still working on that, because we received pay applications that were through June 30th of this year, but were not paid until July. So we still have to go back in, accrue those payments. So we're still working on that. I still think there's going to be a surplus there, probably $3 million, something in that ballpark. And really the reason that is because, as we talked about, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, is the corporate personal property replacement tax issue. And so really that's what carried us through and will provide any surplus for us, in this past year. But we also looked at too, with the extent of the work we had this summer, the extent of the work we will have next summer, because again, remember, besides these, we're still bringing over that field house project. Then we're going into the year 2023, 24, into the 24 summer. And that would typically be a year when the district would, in 2023, 2024, early December, January, somewhere in that area, look at selling bonds, and then planning more extensive projects for the summer of 2024. Those projects could be, as we did in 2013, 2014, those projects lasted the entire year. So they started in the summer of 2014, and then were wrapped up, literally they went the whole year, and then we're finally finished in 2015. So we know we'll be taking on, assuming that's what the direction the board wants to go again, we know we'll be taking on quite a hefty summer in 2024, and probably all of the 24-25 school year into that summer of 2025.
Which means the board will start to discuss those potential projects next spring. So it's
Right.
coming quickly.
Right. So that was kind of the reason what we pulled out here were, look, these are the top needs for the district right now in terms of what we have. And so let's pull those forward. I know there's an entire list of other projects here as I kind of talked you through. The yellow are the top priorities. The ones in gray are kind of top priorities, but these other ones jumped up ahead of them. The ones in green are essentially a lot of the projects from the facilities plan that we have. And then the ones in blue are, questions, and people say, hey, can we get this? Can we do that? Can we do these? And we try to get as much of that in as we can. Some of those we can do in just building and grounds, maintenance, those types of things. We can get that, get some of those done as well, and they don't rise to the level of a capital project. But obviously, these do, and these are the ones that we are at this time recommending that the board would approve on next Monday night for creation of bid specifications, and then going to public bid with those. And remember, simply because we do that does not mean that we have to run those projects. We can certainly take the bids, look at those, and if they're way out of line with what we think pricing is, we simply reject those bids and we don't run that project. Because that has become, in the last year or two, Paul, right? That's become part of the exercise where you look at it and say, look, the value of this is this, but we're not getting, the contractors who are large enough to do it, so you're paying quite a premium to get a smaller contractor in, those types of things. And again, you're going to hear me say this during the budget piece, we don't operate in a vacuum. Inflation is infecting everything we do as well. And every supply, every purchase service, every construction project, all of those things, we are also seeing the increase in inflation. And unfortunately, in our inflation, when we talk about our revenue sources, we're capped at 5% for the tax levy. We can't go any higher than 5%. And the first 5% does not affect this current year. We're always a year in arrears. So the tax levy that, again, it's our main source of revenue, that first 5% increase won't affect us until the 2024 budget. So we're still a year behind. The increase in this year's is 1.4%. So we're still kind of chasing that, and obviously we're going to chase that here for a little bit of time. But I know I've spoken a lot on these, and I apologize for going as quickly as I can. I'm just trying to get through everything, so, you know, and hopefully everybody's got a good understanding. I'd be happy to answer any questions on these. Why we've chosen them, obviously, we've kind of talked about that, but
I do have a question, like looking at the green,
yeah.
like when you're looking at kind of like alarms made, when there's like fire alarm replacements recommended.
Yeah.
So like, I hate to have that fail.
So,
You know what I mean? Like, it's
Absolutely.
different to have like the AC fail.
Yeah.
Than like something like that. So like, why was it recommended to be replaced?
Yeah.
Is it just because it's old? Just a little bit more understanding.
that's exactly right. And so when you see these, some of these recommendations on here, first of all, let me be clear, we do not operate any of our facilities without a functioning fire alarm.
I assume that. But
Yeah, that does not happen. Yeah, in fact, they function very well, as we.
Maybe too well, huh?
Yeah, well, I would never say too well, but as we found out on Friday, they were doing some work, welding work at South Campus, and of course, fire alarm goes, which is good. It's what it's supposed to do. So no, we don't operate any of the facilities without functioning fire alarms. We have continued to repair those if needed. But yes, are the systems older? They are, and we've done some upgrades to them as well. And so we continue to do that. We will not operate without a functioning fire alarm. Does there come a time when you say, look, it's old enough that we should probably replace the entire system? Yeah, that eventually does happen. But right now, that's why we're looking at it saying, look, we still have some time on that. That could be a project that we tackle with potentially some of the bond money, something along those lines.
So it's not like imminent, but, okay.
Yeah. No, I would not say it's imminent that any of our fire alarm systems are going to be.
It just seems like
commission.
those are,
And it's tested regularly as well, just to make sure.
okay, so
stuff's
it's not like
safe.
you would have a, I mean, I guess that would be like, thanks for saying it, Brian, like there would be like some signs that might be failing.
Yeah.
that you
Well,
could, because when you said with the
When's
AC.
the next
like, you
testing?
couldn't-
Is that, I'm sure it's coming up the next week? Okay, there you go. So it was just
So
tested
it's
last
still
week.
working, there's not like patches that are on there.
No, not at
Okay.
all. No, and actually, last year we upgraded a large portion of the South Campus fire alarm system.
Got it.
Where we were having some problems. We completely upgraded that. There were portions of it that needed it. We did that, and I think that's been functioning fine since then. Right, Brad?
Very aggressive with repairs. The recommendation is that the cabling, that's the concern, is that the cabling is aging. And
That's what ages.
That's what
Okay, that's what, just not really understanding it fully.
Yeah.
Yes, but again, we are very aggressive towards that. We take care of the issues, and I don't see any signs of imminent failure.
But I just didn't want it to be like, oh my gosh, the chiller went, okay, the smoke alarm went.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
no.
then you couldn't have school or something.
And Brad, to be clear, am I correct that in saying that as if there is an issue in the fire alarm system someplace, typically that will set the alarm off, not send it the other direction where it doesn't work? Yeah, that's typically what happens.
Got it.
So if something does fail, it will actually trip the entire alarm. It will either empty the building, or it will notify the fire panel, the head-end fire panel, that there is a fault somewhere, something along those lines, and then we get it
That
corrected.
makes me just feel a little bit better. I just want a little
Yes.
more explanation on
Yeah.
that. Thanks.
I guess
Sure.
relatedly, is it fair to assume that what you've proposed, the projects in yellow, is the kind of full population of what you and the team have deemed most critical, and that you don't feel budget constrained? There's not, one more project that you'd really like us to consider that's high priority, life safety-wise or otherwise?
No, I think you're accurate in what you said, where we said, look, these are the top ones right now. We are always, of course, looking at the budget dollars. I mean, that always is part of it. But at this particular point, I think these are the top recommendations based on the needs. And then, like I said, we can certainly explore much more extensive work for that following summer, 2024 and into 2025.
Thank you.
Brian, what's the next new AC area that we would, I didn't know where that was on the
Yeah,
list.
so there's a couple of areas that we would be looking at. So first of all, one of the areas we'd be looking at is the south and west wing of the North Campus main facility. Okay, so that is one of the areas that we would be focusing in on, because first of all, the air handlers there are old as well. I think those are 1960s as well, right, Brad? The
Yeah.
late 50s, early 60s for
Okay.
the air handlers on the, essentially the south end of the building that come down the west side here. We would be looking at that. That is an extensive project. And the reason that's an extensive project is because those air handlers, in order to be removed, they're up on the 4th floor of the facility. And in order to be removed, we actually have to remove a section of the roof. And so they have to come out the roof, and then the new ones have to come back in through the roof. So that is an extensive project, at which point you would also look at redoing that roof at the same
Yeah,
time.
is that on that, is that
Yes.
in the gray?
Yeah,
or
those,
is
that's
that-
actually one of the better areas, those roofs over there. But if you're going to rip it apart, you're probably going to redo it.
You're asking, is that the section of the roof that we've already recommending for next year?
No, that's not part of that. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yeah, this is, so everything that we're recommending is in the front end of the building, on the Cosset side of the building, essentially. The areas that we're talking about would be more Elm and Park of the building in that direction. And so that area, those roofs would have to come off. So you'd probably redo the roof at that point. You would also be doing in those classrooms, because those are not served by unit vents, those are served by, essentially, they would be served by VAV boxes. And so all of the ceiling and lighting would have to come out of all of those classrooms. And so at that point, you're replacing the ceiling and lighting in those too. You also have, there's one of the life safety recommendations is that some of those walls don't go all the way to the ceiling. And so at that point, once you have all of those, that ceiling and lighting taken out, you also finish those walls going all the way to the ceiling. So that becomes a rather extensive project, and probably a difficult one to finish in one summer. So that's something, again, a focus area for us, but something that's going to need some very strategic planning, not to confuse it with a strategic planning process. But that one will, because we'll be affecting a large number of classrooms, and there will be, obviously, disruption to some of those.
I was thinking about piggybacking onto what Allison had said too, Brian, because I was wondering where, outside of what we've listed in yellow as replacing those two existing AC areas, LTTV studio and the library, what other areas we had, if we had any other opportunities, because of things like we talked about, those timelines. One of the things I think that we've been communicating is that it's because it's such a timely project and you have to, do it when students are not in class. Are we missing? Should we be using next summer again to be able to do and move some more of the air conditioning opportunities? Should we be pushing that through? And should that also be on our list? Is there a smaller project that's something that we could do to continue to move that forward and take advantage of when our students are out of school?
So we talked about, when you say smaller project, we did not, obviously, the project I just talked about here at North Campus is not a small project.
Right.
We also looked at the J-Wing, correct? Paul, was that?
Correct.
We looked at the J-Wing at South Campus. And the J-Wing is roughly 14 labs, science classrooms, right? We were anticipating, we talked about potentially adding some air conditioning to that wing, to those 14 classrooms. What we're seeing right now is that the estimate, Paul, correct if I'm wrong, for those classrooms was about $1.2 million to $1.4 million.
Even more than that,
Was it higher than that?
$1.6 million and $1.8 million.
$1.6 million, $1.8 million, okay, for those classrooms. And I think there's the potential that we would even have to add another chiller to that facility at that particular point.
We are at the limit where we are now.
Right.
And not only that, sorry to cut you off there, Brian, is also additional electrical work. As
Right.
we know from dealing this summer, that would be required as well.
Right.
So
So, yeah, so we did look at that, and we said, hey, look, are there other opportunities here? And sure, there's always other opportunities. It's just a matter of when we start talking about some of those numbers that we were looking at there, for that type of a cost, it's obviously fairly expensive. That's not to say we wouldn't do it, but we're looking at taking all things into consideration there. That J-Wing is science labs, and clearly, when we talk about the bang for the dollar, right? When we look at the B and the C wing, we know that almost every student is going to go through there a couple times a day during a school day, where those science labs you wouldn't necessarily say the same thing. Now, That being said, that isn't necessarily a reason not to do it, but even that isn't necessarily a smaller project. We're for the 14 classrooms, we start looking at the cost and the size of that project. If we're adding another chiller in there, that's quite a bit of work that we would have to probably get started on here, I would suspect, much like we did this year, where we'd be into, starting in February, running the piping and the tunnels, doing all that sort of thing again. So it's certainly a possibility. We've looked at it. I don't know that it's a recommendation at this point based on what we see, but, we did talk about that one anyway.
Brian, if I could add a couple comments here as far as this current summer's work and what's in yellow. First thing is, we are still up against very long lead times, unusually long lead times. I know just for the 2 mechanical projects that we're considering here on this list, I think we're at 36 weeks
Yeah.
to order mechanical equipment. That's how far out, which is why we really kind of need to get started sooner rather than later. The roofs are not quite that bad, but the 2 mechanical projects, anything mechanical is still sort of under the gun. And they need to be addressed. And as you guys know from looking at the list, they've always been high priority. So it's not like these jumped to the list magically. They've been in the red for a long time.
Oh, sorry, Carrie.
No, you're fine. I'm struggling to hear Paul, but,
Oh, is the mic?
yeah,
I don't think.
I guess I'm still just thinking back to when we did decide last year that we were going to look at those projects for summer. We did decide to start a proposal process like now. And I was wondering, would we want to consider doing that again? Because I go back to, I understand that the lead times are long. For me, that's even more of an argument about why we might want to get a leg up on it, start looking at it, potentially, lock in resources. Because I think we're just going to end up delaying the advancement of being able to try to get our schools eventually fully air conditioned, which, we know wasn't going to be something we'd be able to do overnight, even with all the resources in the world. So I guess I think that's where I'm coming from. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, and I can't see you guys to read the room, so I'm not sure, but I feel like I think I would have thought if we could have looked at something and putting that as part of this early bid process, that we would look at how do we continue to expand on air conditioning opportunities at our campuses every summer that we don't have our students there. That was just something that, for me, felt like it was a priority based on some of our discussions last year.
Well, I think the other issue with that, too, is we kind of talked about some of the cost. And again, this was part of some of our conversations where, if you're looking at $1.6 million to $1.8 million for 14 classrooms, there's probably a better bang for the dollar running that as part of a bigger project. Paul, would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
So, I mean, when you start to look at it, you say, okay, look, we're going to run an air conditioning project in the J wing and the E wing, right? Or we're going to expand that out to the D wing, those types of things, where you're probably going to see a better, dollar cost for the size of the project than what you would for these particular 14 rooms, essentially, is really what it comes down to. Because naturally, it's an economy of scale, and the larger the project you run, you have a contractor that's going to mobilize one time, and they're going to do that whether you're doing 14 classrooms or you're doing 35 or whatever the case may be. And so those costs are all wrapped up into a one-time charge, as opposed to let's piecemeal this out one wing at a time, and then you're continually I would say overpaying, but repaying for the mobilization of contractors and that sort of thing. So
Carrie, it's Allison, and I am definitely nodding my head in agreement with what you were saying about, I think we need to keep moving forward on air conditioning and the new air conditioning in some fashion. And I understand what you're saying about, the bang for the buck on the J wing. And I know you're saying that, because to me, it sounds like the North Campus, South and West is definitely a bigger need classroom-wise and heat-wise and everything. And it's a bigger project. Is there something we can do to, get us ready at least to do some forward movement towards this? Because every time we put it off, or every year we put it off, labor's going up, timing's going up, like everything keeps, we want to take this on, so we can't keep kicking it down the road.
Right. And then maybe to that point, Brian, I know what you're saying. I mean, and I appreciate efficiencies of scale and definitely, so maybe then, yeah, if we're just saying J-Wing, maybe it's not the J-Wing, maybe it's for, $3 million. Of course, I don't love these prices, I understand, and I appreciate that, but it still is a priority. And I don't think it is even just about I appreciate that we always look to see what ways all of our students have an opportunity to cool off and get in air conditioning and stuff, but we also have teachers who are in certain classrooms all day long, and I'm sure they get time to cool off too, but I really think that we've had a lot of helpful movement in the right direction with where we landed for this year to get a lot of the air conditioning going, and I feel pretty strongly that we should try to keep that going in some fashion, and we should at least be looking at back to scale of efficiency. Well, okay, J-Wing isn't going to be just enough, but if we did, I don't know, whatever area and this area coupled together, it might be double the cost, but it takes advantage of and helps us use, opportunities that, that we can take advantage of these opportunities during this time of year. I think that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Anyone
Paul,
else?
can you talk, or Brian or Paul, about the, this project here? Like, do we have quick numbers comparing that to the 1.6 or to 1.8 million for the J-Wing? What would this project be in comparison to that? I know that was all in the report that the board saw last fall, but I don't have it in front. I don't have the numbers.
Yeah, so
Off the top of your head.
just to give you an idea, if I remember correctly, I know that the field house here was about, because we broke it out into 3 different bids essentially. The field house here was about $2 million. The contract, if I remember correctly, total was about 6.3 million.
Yes.
I think it's
between
6.3 million
$6.4.
dollars. So $4.3 million was the B wing, the C wing, and the additional chiller there, which roughly 64 classrooms is what was added with that $4.3 million. And then, like I said, the other $2 million is attributable to the field house here in that project.
Yeah, so like that, the project you were talking about though, that is here at North Campus, like, do we have an idea of the total cost of that? The
No.
south, the
not-
south and the west?
No, we've not even
That would-
priced that out.
Okay.
At this time, we did at one time, but those are old numbers. We haven't touched that because again, it's a scheduling issue that we'd have to look at in terms of, I don't even know what that schedule looks like. We haven't even touched on
And
it.
I was just saying that for comparison purposes.
Yeah.
The 1.8 million for south. And it's also, and we're going to get into this in a second, but it's also really important to note that this recommendation is not assuming any additional funds other than no reserve funds. It's just simply the money we have available.
Well, we will be using reserve funds
for the
this year.
North Campus, right.
And then going into next year, of course, I've not done that budget yet, but I have to carry over what the leftover is from that. And so from any projects next summer into the following year. So I haven't gone out that far yet. I will eventually, but I haven't gotten there. So there is the potential that we would be doing some more deficit spending with that,
Even with
in
these
mind.
recommendations.
Correct.
And there's a lot of roofs coming, it looks.
Yeah,
like,
there are.
right? I mean, the air conditioning's
Guess
not
that's what I'm
the
trying to get at,
only
yeah.
thing, but I think maybe, I'm trying to think of what could be helpful to the board. And maybe it's, you guys have all the information on, well, you could do this wing, but then it's the electrical, and then it's another chiller, and then, is there a way to take some time at some point to kind of group what's left for air conditioning in a way that could be feasible, but then to also let us know, well, hey, historically, we spend X million a year on capital projects, and this one chunk is that amount. So there will be no roofs, all else equal. Like, try to give us a better, like a different sense of context around, because we saw the report last year, right, that said, if you do all these things, like, you can organize it in this way to get air conditioning everywhere over the next, 6 years or something.
Right.
But we all talked about, I remember we talked about, well, that, we're not showing any of these other
is done.
projects, we're not showing emergency projects, and there is a finite amount of dollars in the
Right.
current state, right? And you talked about a bond issuance, maybe there's some opportunity there, but I think what would be helpful is to see that we can still achieve this goal over the next X number of years, but like, help us understand, there's nothing left for all these roofs, and you're gonna have, like, we have to do some of the roofs, or, and I'm not asking you to do a 6-year budget down to the penny though either, because there's way too many variables, but if there's a way to help us kind of understand what you see and why you didn't prioritize a new air conditioning project, aside from the field house, which is new, right? Just got delayed a year, but it'll be new air conditioning.
It will be new air conditioning, that's correct.
'Cause I
Here-
think that's the part we're missing, like, why can't we do more new air conditioning like we've talked about?
Well, but I think that he's kind of laying that out. I mean, right now, and how it's prioritized. And isn't it 2 to 3 million that typically we spend for summer projects?
That's correct. Historically, we probably average between $2 and $3 million a year.
Right. So anything over what we have now is going to be 2 to 3 million for the J wing than what we currently have,
Yeah.
unless we're going to go into deficit to pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the questions that maybe I'm not clear on in this perspective from the board is, what is the goal? And so what I mean by that is we talk about saying, hey, look, let's push out air conditioning. Okay, that's fine. But I guess then what I need to know in order to take a look at this from a financial perspective, a timing perspective, all of that, is to say, you know, look, 10 years from now, we want all of our facilities air conditioned. 5 years from now, you know, and then we can go back and say, look, what is reasonable in terms of the finances that are available, the bond issue that's coming up, those kinds of things, I think would be helpful from that perspective, so that I can then say, all right, let's kind of work backward from a timeline of saying, hey, look, here's a goal. And we may say, you know, again, 6 years from now, we want all of the facilities to be air conditioned, the classrooms to be air conditioned. Okay. And so we set that as a goal. I think that's fine. There's going to be things that are going to occur in there where I can tell you, look, I do a 5-year forecast as I put out to the board every year, typically in March. And as I say when I put this out, please take it with a grain of salt. It's just an idea of what I know right now, and pushing that all forward then for the next 5 years. That does not mean that anything will look like that 3 years from now, 2 years from now. Case in point, as I had talked about, I think back in March, typically the district was at $3.5 million of corporate personal property replacement tax. Last year we took in $9.8 million. A year before then, I had never figured that much into the 5-year forecast. That changed, and that's a dramatic difference in terms of what we're looking at. So I guess really what would be helpful then is to say, hey, look, what are we kind of looking to do so that there's at least some semblance of structure around it, also working in the fact that, look, there's roofing work that has to be done, there's, you know, washrooms that have to be renovated, there's other things here as well. And that's the extent of that list that I have there, right? I mean, that's what I have, and that's why I present that to the board, so that it's all there. It's you know, everybody sees those projects. And so I think that's really what ultimately, potentially what my question would be, is to say, okay, well, how do we want to proceed going forward, and what's the board willing to say, hey, look, this is what we want to do as far as, you know, spending down some of the reserves. How far down do we want to go? Every time we do that, when we spend down the reserves, that's okay, but it affects multiple things. It affects potentially our financial profile score with the State Board of Education, because they do want you to have so many days cash on hand, your fund balance to revenue ratio. You also now, it certainly, as you, in an increasing environment anyway, will have less money to invest as far as interest income, although it hasn't been great the last year anyway. So there are other factors. And then there's the board policy, which the board policy, I have to go back and take a look. I think it says, is it 33%? The board, you know, will try to maintain 33% of fund balance to revenue, or fund balance to revenue, or fund balance to
But we're
expenditure ratio.
yeah.
Which,
crazy
yeah, I'm not
at it.
saying that we're getting close to that.
I know.
I'm just simply saying that we have to take all of that into consideration and say, okay, where is it do we want to go?
So one of the, I think the problem, at least I have with putting out, you know, where the board wants to go or where my feeling is on that is I kind of put it back to you, Brian, and say, we see the capital projects we need to work on with the roofs and stuff like that. We see different areas where we get the budget and we see, AC future projects. I kind of put this back on you and say, how do we put this all together and what is our timeline of how we can do this? If we do it if we get it fully AC in 5 years, this is how it might impact, because we do have roofs, we do have, other projects. This is how it will impact our reserves in the next 5 years. Or this, if we do it in 8 years, this is how it would impact, again, going from what we know right now. And I think that would be helpful for us to know, because we don't have the full picture. We get, the roofs at one time and the AC at different times, and I would love that information, but I'm not worried. We're at a 50% right now, ballpark, of the reserves. And, so I think there is a little bit of wiggle room without getting into any issues at all. But I would love to see kind of a bigger master plan. And I know that's a lot more work, but I think that would be
I
helpful.
think it's important to note, like, that this list is put together using the master plan. That was, the last update was January 2020 with architectural input, obviously, in terms of useful life cycle, maintenance cycles for each of the items on that list. I think the most important parameter is that to keep in mind is that these recommendations are all based upon the parameter that we're going to spend about X number of dollars each summer, $2 to $3 million.
Right.
If the board wants us to work outside of that parameter, then that changes the game. And so I don't feel like it's enough to say we want to accomplish this within 5 years or 10. I think everyone sign up for solving it tomorrow. But when you have that discussion without the parameter of how much we're spending every summer, which has been pretty consistent,
Right.
Except for this summer, and that was obviously based upon deficit spending. And so that I think,
And remember, too,
go ahead.
we had $3 million worth of grant money as well that
Grant
we're
money
working
as well.
with, too.
So
That was,
if the board is interested in that parameter changing, then we have to go back and say, okay, we want to spend more than $2 to $3 million per summer, or the amount that Brian has on there. That's what we need to change.
I think we're all saying the same thing. I guess what we don't know as a board is if $2 to $3 million a summer with the high nobody wants leaking roofs and mold and things growing. Does that mean we'll never do new air conditioning? Like, that's the context
Is it
that we don't
obtainable?
have. Or is it, well, if you spend an extra $2 million every summer, you can, and I know this is a lot of information to digest, but we don't have that context. So at $2 to $3 million a summer, maybe you might say, gosh, it's going to be really hard to get to that next air conditioning project. We won't get to the next one for, in my example, 4 to 5 years from now. Ooh, that might cause us to say, let's take another look, or let's think about this bond issuance and really allocating a decent portion, not to a brand new room or facility, but to chipping away at these. Like, I can't tell how urgent the roof is, because I think, one extreme is how fast can we go with just doing air conditioning, new air conditioning, and doing nothing else? And you'll say, that's a terrible idea, because we always have emergency repairs, and there's some of these maintenance items that have to get addressed, right? I mean, we hear from our constituents on air conditioning, but I think everyone's also assuming, well, the toilets are going to flush and the roofs aren't going to leak and we're not going to have mold for our kids, right? So it's that kind of fuller context. It's probably some scenario running to say at the historic levels, yeah, it might take X years to get air conditioning. So, okay, well, what's another opportunity, and can we meet somewhere in between those extremes? And I don't need this for Monday, because that's a big ask, right?
Oh, right,
Like,
for sure, yeah.
so I think it's a great start.
I mean, and this is obviously going to be discussions that happen throughout the year, but I think it's a safe assumption, based upon all the conversations we've had, that summer of '24 with the bond issuance would be
Aha.
An ideal
significant air
opportunity.
conditioning project. That would be a significant opportunity.
And with respect to the J-Wing, when we were having a conversation about the J-Wing, I would be happier, obviously, none of this makes us happy because we'd like to have it done, but we realize that we have constraints, and we have practical issues and reality issues of having aging buildings and other things on the list. But if we knew that we weren't going to do the J-wing because in the summer of 2024 into 2025, we could lop off a much bigger chunk because we've got the time there, we've got the money there from selling the bonds. That, I think, would placate perhaps all of us, and knowing that, you know, we're not tending to it this year, but our plan is this year, we're gonna get X amount of.
Part of the discussion last fall was exactly that, Dawn,
Yeah.
was we deferred some really important projects for summer of 2022 because we wanted to knock off a ton of air conditioning, which happened. Then looking at summer 23, we need to go back and revisit some of those projects with the idea that in the bond issuance in 24, we'd have another opportunity to knock off a significant
Yeah.
project. And now, when you put that together with, and you kind of briefly mentioned this, Paul, about the 1.6 to 1.8 million for only 14 classrooms. Can you speak more about, is that based upon concerns around inflation and pricing right now, and we anticipate that becoming better? Or is that just always going to, do you see that getting worse?
Yeah, I don't think, at this point, we don't know when or if things will get better. And if
Yeah.
we think about it realistically, I'm sure Brian can talk about this, certainly. And that is, things usually don't come down.
Yep.
Once they go up,
Yep.
that's where they are. But
But the difference would be,
they'll stabilize as opposed to constantly rising, as we all know everything has been doing this year.
and the significant difference between next year and the following year would be that we, in 24, potentially, the board could make a decision to put together the J-wing with a couple of other wings
Right.
and do more classrooms.
Yeah. So it's hard, but I completely hear you, but it's just hard to have this conversation and say, well, we should or shouldn't go into any additional reserve spending
Yeah.
without seeing the scope, especially since we're not that far off from it now. We're, you know, and I know
Right.
you'll get to it, but it would be easier to digest that if we knew that at this point.
And that's kind of why I said what I said earlier. First of all, I want to make the point here that, look, the district is not in financial trouble. That's not an issue. I want to make sure that's clear. Secondly, I had asked Paul last week, I said, hey, Paul, what if we delay this till September? And Paul kind of said to me, are you goofy? Because if we do that, your mechanical projects, the ones that you do have listed here, are going to be in jeopardy, because every day we wait, the longer the delay is, you know, potentially the lead time is. And the reason I wanted to wait until September is what I said earlier, is I wanted to see, as we go into the first week in September, our auditors will be out. We will start getting a real nice picture of how we operated last year and what surplus we had last year, based on, again, the fact that we had this additional money from our CPPRT, corporate personal property replacement tax. And so I would have a little bit better picture of all of that as well in September, but right now, we're not able to wait until then to get these projects going. Certainly, once I have a better look at that, we can certainly come back and say, look, is there another opportunity here, you know, in September to say, okay, you know, we ended up with a $4 million surplus from the 2022, you know, year. There's some additional money here. We can spend some of that. That's what we can do. But like I said, our books are still open on the FY22 year, and they will be through the end of August. And as I said, I can tell you, I know we have at least $2 million worth of expense that we have to add to our current financials from FY22. And that process continues through the months of July and August. And so as we're catching up with all of that, we get a real good picture in September of what really kind of went on in that fiscal year. And so I had hoped to kind of delay that so that I could have a better answer on that information. And probably 3 years ago, we could have done that. We could have waited till September and said, yeah, okay, now we can move forward with these projects. We really don't kind of have that luxury right now, Paul, right? That's what you told me.
Correct.
Yeah.
We've got some long lead times still for those mechanical items.
And so, I mean, I think we can always still come back in
But that's
September.
what I hear you saying, that, like, let's get these moving now, because
Yeah.
we're in the situation that we're in.
Yeah.
And in order to get this done, we've got to get this moving. But know that I've got an eye towards how things are going to shake out at the end of August. I'll know that in September and potentially come back for more.
Sure.
And it's 33% is our board policy.
33, yeah.
of
That's what I thought of it.
fund
I said
balances.
33, I
You
think,
did
right?
say
Yeah.
33.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand where you're at with these top 4 projects that you've listed up here. And I mean, that wasn't really any of my concern, but I think my concern was just yes, I think we should move forward with getting the bids going on these projects. I don't want to delay, don't want to have any holdups on these critical projects. I just would like to see how we can look at, based on maybe, Brian, what you do find out from the auditors, is, can we, and do we have any opportunity to continue what we started and try to figure out how that looks. And, if there is a surplus, maybe that eases the burden of it. How much, back to Allison's other question, what maybe we've never even considered is, what is a comfortable level, if there is such a thing, for us to be able to dip into reserves here that still keeps us at a very financially, fiscally responsible status? So I think those are some questions that I'd like us to be talking about, and I would love to see us maybe have that conversation if we needed to. Would that be reasonable to see something like that come up again in September?
Yeah, and we did the same thing in this current year. I think we had about a $4 million surplus in the prior year in FY21, and we said, okay, let's go ahead and use some of that for, these projects going forward. And, in this year's budget coming up, we have almost a $3.8 million projected deficit, but we talked about that and we knew that was going to be coming. So that was a conscious decision to use those dollars. And so certainly we would continue looking at that going forward as well.
Great.
So goal for now is to get authorization to prepare bid specs for these projects with the idea that we come back in September with some.
Yeah, we can talk a
more
little bit more in
information around
September.
financials.
The unfortunate part about all of this, of course, is the fact that if we're talking about additional HVAC work as we are, that's the one that's having the biggest lead time problems right now. So, but certainly we can come back and still talk that through. And Paul, we can get your opinion on it at that time, along with you and Ed, and then we can figure out how we want to proceed from there.
Okay.
Just a quick question about the scoreboard. For the Bennett Field scoreboard, there were some contributions. Is there an opportunity for any contributions for the scoreboard for the swim?
Not that we know of at this point. I mean, that was all decided upon with Booster Club and Alumni Association last year.
Yeah.
So we've not solicited anything, or no one's come to us to say, hey, but we feel like it's just got to get purchased.
Right.
No, I know it does. I guess I don't have the background of how the Bennett Field process led us to knowing that we had those contributions. So.
I think you want to talk to that?
Yeah. So initially, I think it was the boosters, if I remember correctly.
They came first.
Yeah, they went to John Grunke, athletic director, and said, hey, we have some money, what would be helpful? What can we do with this? And that's when that idea of the scoreboard at Bennett Field was born. So, and then the Alumni Association also, at the time, Jennifer Bialabach, who was heading that up, came along and said, look, the Alumni Association also would like to get involved here, and they'd like to match that. So I think each of them had $59,000 that they put down. And that number is kind of odd, but it was based initially on sort of a refurbished scoreboard that we were going to put up. And then we said, no, that's maybe not the best idea. We got some, additional information. And so we ended up going the new route. So it's $118,000 of money that was then eventually donated for those. But I don't know of any right now that we would have.
All right.
Are we?
So next week, this will come back with authorization to prepare bid specs for the.
Correct, for the projects that we have listed. And then, as we said, we can continue to look and see what else we can, based on finances, based on time, what else we can do.
Brian, one other question I had that I didn't know where to find it is, and forgive me because I'm really foggy in my brain on this one, there was discussion earlier in the year about a women's locker room.
Yes.
At North Campus. What's happening with that?
Yeah, so we've talked with our architects about that as well, and we think there's some fairly easy solutions to that, adding some banks of lockers, which doesn't rise to the level necessarily of a capital project. We can just kind of work that in with some of the other expense
Right.
throughout the year. And so we've had some conversations. We've kind of talked about where we might place those in that locker room. And so I think we're going to be able to do that without, obviously, without a capital
process.
project type of thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. All right.
And if it does get to that level for some reason, we bring it back to the board and say, hey, look, we want to move forward with this, and here's the cost, and here's why we're bringing it back. But we think right now we can do that without it rising to that level.
And would that be done next summer or before that?
We might be able to get that done sometime during this year. That's
Great.
that's kind of the goal,
Okay,
to get it done sometime this year.
all right. Okay, the final agenda item under facilities is HVAC system repair, a request for emergency authorization. Brian Stasia.
Thank you again. And so, as I said, I think in June we did one of these. I said I think I've done one other in my career, and now here we go again with another one. So, the project that's going on at South Campus right now, we added a new cooling tower chiller because that was what was required to get the additional classrooms cooled. There is an existing cooling tower and chiller there that currently cools the field house, some of the other facilities in that building as well. The system, correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, the system is designed so that both of those cooling tower chillers work in conjunction with each other,
Correct.
cooling all of the facilities now that we have cooled there. In the process of going through and getting the original chiller, the existing one, ready for the connection with the new chiller, we discovered that there is a compressor that is failing on that particular chiller and needs to be replaced. There's also some software upgrades to that need to be replaced as well. That chiller, I believe, was installed in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. So it's about 18 years old at this point. And so there is about what we estimated about $190,000 worth of repairs, and that comes from a quote from a company that we have to, that can do the work. Brad, I don't know, am I missing anything on that at all that we need to add?
No, that's entirely accurate. We lost one of the compressors. That compressor needs to be replaced, and the motherboard failed. So the board has to be installed.
Yeah, thank you. And so really what ends up happening is this exceeds our bidding threshold of $50,000 for a building and grounds project. However, if we end up going to bid on this, it'll probably be December before we are able to actually get that chiller cooling tower repaired. And we're really kind of wasting the ability to fully cool all the facilities there, which is what we're really looking to do here coming up in August and September and however long we need it going into the fall season. So really the goal here would be, look, we want to get this up and running. We want to get the repairs made so that that chiller is fully functioning the way that it needs to, so that we have the full cooling here. And quite honestly, I don't even know if we'd be able to even do those repairs into November and December. We'd probably be talking about the fall or the spring of next year, and then we're kind of re-going through all of that. And we have, with the two systems up and running, there's balancing that has to go on. That's probably going to go on even now through probably, what, Paul, September into October potentially?
At least through the end of August.
Yeah.
If not further.
So we want to get this repaired as quickly as we possibly can. And again, if we go to bid, it's going to be an extended time period before we can get that done. And so that's why we're asking for the board to grant essentially the emergency provision to move forward, get this done as quickly as we can, so we have that cooling in place.
Any questions on that? Okay, so we'll make a vote for next week. Okay. All right, we move on to finance, and we'll begin with the FY23 tentative budget presentation. Brian Stashak.
Thank you again. Okay. So this is the FY23 tentative budget, and I'm going to tell you that it's tentative at this particular point. There are a number of reasons for the tentative piece of this. Of course, as we know, we're still negotiating one of our labor contracts, so that piece is still out there. We do have some, provision in there for some increases, obviously, but we still have to monitor that. One of our main revenue sources, our property tax levy. I still do not have the final numbers in terms of what that will be from Cook County this year. Now, I can estimate them, I think, fairly well at this point. However, what's really kind of unknown to us is what the new property values are. So there's the potential that there could be a difference here of anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 in terms of what I'm actually budgeting for revenue. I have a number built in. I'm probably a little more conservative at this point because it's tentative. The reason that we're seeing this delay is that you'll see this in your own homes. Cook County's my understanding is switching over to a new system, a new software system. There was some issues with doing that. There's also reassessment issues that were going on. And so they have delayed the second collection of the property tax bills until probably a due date of December 1st, when they're usually in September, somewhere in that area. So you're going to actually see that on your own properties. So they have not given us the final tax levy yet either. So I'm doing some estimating with that, although I think I'm not too far off. Again, I think there's some smaller dollars there in terms of what will ultimately be. A side note to that is that I'm probably going to have to come back to the board in September and ask for some transfer of funds between our district operating funds, because with the property tax collections being delayed, we're going to have enough cash, I believe, to get through. That's not the issue. But in the individual funds, we may have to move some cash over temporarily to cover and then move it back. But we'll talk a little bit more about that in September. That's a side note to that delay in collection. So we have that piece out. We also have the corporate personal property replacement tax unknown. And I can tell you that it is somewhat of a drastic unknown at this point. And the reason I say that, again, historically, we'd see about $3.5 million. That was in FY20. In FY20, we were my first 6 years here was about $3.5 million, averaging somewhere in that ballpark. In FY21, we saw 4.7, I think it was, if I remember correctly. Last year was 9.8. And so it's all related to corporate taxes, S corporations, all the different corporations in the state of Illinois. It's all economy related. And, they pay these corporate taxes. And so as the economy goes, so kind of do these personal property replacement taxes go. I can tell you right now that we had the $9.8 million last year in total. Our first payment of the year in July was about $900,000. This was for last year's payment. Our first payment this year in July was $1.8 million. So I'm waiting to see what the Illinois Department of Revenue, they usually put a projection up. They usually don't do it till end of August. So again, there's another unknown there. Their projection last year, by the way, was also way off. I think they projected about 5.2 million for us, maybe something along those lines. So they weren't even close in their projection either. I've talked to many of my colleagues, other school district business managers, and we're all perplexed by this. And the general consensus is maybe you want to budget for revenue this year about 75% of what you saw last year. Probably a conservative number. It's kind of what I have in the budget right now. I want to take a look and see what occurs with what the Illinois Department of Revenue projects for us. And then we'll kind of, again, try to take a well-educated guess on that number. So just simply because we had that higher payment in July versus last year, that does not mean it's going to continue throughout the year. That just simply means that's one payment that's much higher, but it certainly is representative of this increased dollar amount that we've seen. And I kind of have, again, beginning on page 13, you see a number of bulleted points there. So I'm just kind of touching on a few of these as we go. So currently in corporate personal property replacement taxes, I have $7.75 million budgeted. Again, that number could go up. It could go down. It seems like at the end of the day, we still may be closer to what we were last year than anything. But I'll keep an eye on that one. Again, property taxes, we're up probably about $2.3 million is what I'm estimating right now. That's a 1.4% increase. And then roughly $500,000 attributable to some new property as well. So we will, look at that. There's also this year this recapture levy from. It's an addition to, and it's the first year that this has happened. So when we end up paying out our property tax refunds, those are paid out in a current year in which they're settled. Sometimes those are 3, 4, 5, 10 years old, the cases, but we pay them out in the current year once they're settled. And so some of these recapture dollars, we're seeing a total dollar amount coming back to us of about $864,000. So that's in addition to what we've never seen before. But we pay out these property tax refunds, and I kind of mentioned that there in one of the bullet points where some of our, our property taxes were a little bit higher. I'm sorry, property tax refunds were a little bit higher last year, roughly $2.3 million. And so that's how much we actually don't receive from our current year, property tax distributions. That being said, as you know, we rely roughly 91% of our revenues are coming from local sources, which is property taxes, corporate personal property taxes, fees. That number is actually down a little bit, only because we're anticipating $2 million in ESSER money coming in from grants, and then hopefully the grant from the state of Illinois for another $1 million. Every time I submit something to them, they send something back to me requesting more information, and it's really getting frustrating, but I'll leave it at that. And so then you see some of the other, revenues, and again, federal revenues are up, state's up a little bit because of that additional $1 million, and then the federal revenues would be up roughly $2 million because of that ESSER money, which we're putting toward the air conditioning for this year. Interest income is going to be an interesting topic again this year. Interest rates are certainly coming up. However, the problem is, as we go through the end of the calendar year and we don't have these dollars available to invest because of the tax collections, the potential is we're actually losing some interest income because of that. So we hopefully we're going to see something similar to what we had at least last year, and hopefully better than that. But again, as I mentioned, I think before, we could not have picked a worse time to try to rebuild a portfolio in that environment last year when interest rates initially were really at zero. But we'll look to obviously increase that. Just kind of looking through this budget, again, total salaries budget to increase about $2.5 million, almost 5% over what we saw last year. And we know why that is. There were obviously various increases to employee groups. And so those are affecting obviously some of the numbers that we have there. One of the areas of concern that I saw last year, and I think we're going to continue to see moving forward, are employee benefits, and the benefits really directly related to our insurance payments. We enjoyed, I say enjoyed, I don't know that that's the right word, but we had 2 good years really of insurance costs, and I hate to say this, but it was due to COVID. And really what that means is, if you remember back in March of 20, everything shut down. So people weren't going to doctor's offices because they weren't open. And so they kind of started reopening that summer, June, July, August. And then, of course, there were still a number of people who were still putting off elective surgeries, because they still didn't want to go to the doctor's office until, hey, there's a vaccination. I'm going to wait till that happens. Now we're starting to see that pick way back up again. And so essentially, our employee benefits were about $500,000 higher than what I had budgeted last year. So for FY22, we were about $500,000 higher than what we initially had budgeted. And I'm anticipating about another $500,000 increase this year. So that's a $1 million increase in employee benefits over a 2-year span. And so I think we're going to have to continue to monitor that, because I think it'll eventually level off, but I think we're seeing a lot of people who are going to the doctor now having elective surgeries done that weren't doing them for the last 1.5 years, almost 2 years. And so they're getting caught back up. And that's a trend. As I talk with my colleagues, again, throughout school districts and their benefits, that's what everybody's kind of seeing at this particular point. So something we have to keep in mind going forward. Again, we're seeing purchase services are up. Supplies are going to be up. One of the increases that we're really anticipating, and I'm going to have to go back and I still have to look at this one. First student came to us back in probably May, June, and said, well, we're close to probably needing $600,000 more from you for next year for transportation costs. And that being for the same routes, for the same, nothing really changing. And I've kind of gone back and forth with them on a number of phone calls, number of meetings, and said, look, we got to be able to do something else here. $600,000 is just kind of, it was over a 50% increase. And we said, we got to look at this differently, look at some different ways and that sort of thing. They've come back with potentially condensing some routes and doing that sort of thing. So I have kind of a large increase on the purchase services right now, which is being driven a lot by those transportation costs. I'm going to reevaluate that over the next month and see where we can land with that as we get some more accurate information from first student. Beside that, even that, our special ed transportation costs with Grand Prairie, those are still going up, average 6 to 7%, somewhere in that ballpark. That particular cost is also dependent on the number of students that we have. So that varies every year. But if students require transportation, we need to provide it for them. And it's a little different in terms of cost there, because you might be transporting, only 2 or 3 students to one particular school, and you're running one particular route for that. So it's obviously, there's a cost there that's involved with those also. So
Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt, but with first student, didn't we have to pay a lot extra so they wouldn't increase by a certain percentage, or?
yeah, we had gone back and forth with them on that. And really, that was that increase was pretty much for last year.
Yeah,
So they had absorbed that last year. Now, this year they came back to us. And basically what they were saying was, look, your routes, most of the afternoon routes used to pair. And what they mean by that is other districts would use those same buses, same drivers, so they could drop our kids off and then go run other routes for other districts. They're saying at this time, a lot of that has gone away. And I said, well, how did it all go away in 1 year? And they said, well, that's not what really happened. It's been going away over a number of years. We just haven't really increased the cost and looked at that. So that was part of my contention, saying, we're not doing all this in 1 year then. I said, that's not really how this is going to work. I said, we I understand your fuel costs are up. I get it. You're having to pay your drivers more to retain them. I get it. All of those things factored in. I said, we really need to look at some of this route structure. And that's when they kind of went back and they started doing that. So I'm still waiting on some final information from them. But again,
we
look,
didn't have a contract with a percentage, or, I thought there was like a maximum percentage, that's why we were paying the extra money for.
I feel like that
originally.
was,
Paid a certain percentage during COVID.
Right.
Even though they weren't providing full services.
So
But
that they
But
wouldn't.
it wasn't based on a cap. It was just.
It wasn't
for us-
based on-
basically for them to retain their drivers so that they were ready to go as soon as we were ready to go. basically.
yeah,
Okay.
that's right.
I thought there was a.
Yeah, and we actually negotiated that number way down with them as well. They originally wanted 80%. I think we ended up paying them 40%, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly, during the COVID year, during the spring of 20. So we ended up going down that route as well
Right,
with
but
them.
they barely could even provide us the service in the morning and afternoon. Like, a lot of kids were having to wait an hour,
Yeah.
45 minutes to an hour just to get the bus to go home. And so, like, they barely delivered on service that we were already paying a premium for last year.
Yeah. I think, admittedly, they would tell you they had a rough year last year. And, it has been an issue for them, just as it has for everybody, retaining drivers. And, I will say this, I think they did the best that they could under the circumstances. I will say that. The circumstances for them weren't great. That leading to, obviously, issues with some of our service, and I think other districts that they serve as well. But again, they've had a hard time. I mean, under the, obviously when you're dealing with COVID and it being a communicable disease, it's pretty tough to want to, people to want to drive a bus with, 30, 40 kids on there, and what's your exposure and all that sort of thing. So they're working, they've been working on that. They've been recruiting. I know they've raised their starting salaries. They've raised the salaries of existing drivers, which is why they were also coming back to us and saying, hey, look, we're going to probably need some more money from you for those costs.
Yeah, but
To Michael's point, can we institute some performance thresholds, penalties? I mean, I don't, if they're having us pay a lot more because they need to get higher quality, we should see it in the service, to your point. If there's, now, maybe you need a huge system and that's a lot of monitoring, but I mean, part of why we're modifying our late start, not all, is somewhat to address all the bus issues. So I just hope they know that, yes, they did the best they could, and yes, there are not drivers for cabs and limos or anything else right now either. Like, it's a driving, and many other industries, but
Yeah.
we should at least have an ask for.
Well, I mean,
Service
to
that's
that point,
acceptable.
we do collect data on,
Oh, okay.
on ridership
Yeah.
and on, like, on-time performance. And so they've assured us this year, with the late start schedule, we will not have the issues we had last year. So we will be collecting data on that and ensuring that we don't have the same
Yeah,
issues.
just if
'cause
there's
that
a
was- that was
mechanism in
nightmare.
the contract to
'Cause what's the assurance,
hold
though?
them accountable
Well, that's
for
the
it.
thing, is it built
I mean,
into the
Like, I don't believe it.
contract?
I mean,
Yeah.
there's no other choices. I mean,
No.
we've been down that road.
Yep.
Not
Right.
gonna go down there again.
Right.
That path, that rambling.
Yeah, what I can tell you is my conversations with them so far this year, they're saying right now that they are in much better shape than they were last year, as far as the number of drivers goes, which is good. And, hopefully that will improve their performance.
Right, but I mean, I just feel like, I mean, like what you're saying, like, I mean, so what if you like, if we said to them there were 60 days, I'm just making a number up, obviously, but there were 60 days that you were late, that you didn't perform, they're still making the same amount of money they have. We have no other option. We're in a pickle. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's, what choice do we have? I mean, because if we could maybe structure it into the contract that, like more of like a specific performance type, you must do this or we get this back. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you rebate us back. I mean, they're probably not going to even go for that.
They're not.
You just have to go with it.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going. We had those conversations in prior years, where we've kind of said, look, if you're underperforming, we'd like to see something in there that comes back to us. And they're basically saying, look, we're paying the drivers. Yeah, sure, they may be late, but we're still having to pay the drivers the same dollar amount. And our
why are
bus.
they late? I mean, then you come back to they were late because there was a horrific accident and they couldn't get through. So
Right.
Yes.
When you track it,
Yeah.
there's going to be
And
some.
The other thing too is like the late start issues weren't COVID related. Those have been issues forever here.
Okay.
They always had routes
Yeah.
late on Wednesdays, and it's because we have a late start, and so it more
that's
conflicts
helpful
with
to
the
know, I
elementary
think.
schools. So we just felt like we got to finally fix this with our own schedule because it's been an issue for years.
Yeah, and I think I know I've talked with the board here before, and that is, as far as options go, there really are no other options, and so with first student, we kind of have to, I mean, if we went to bid on this particular program, nobody would be able to come in and underbid them. There's just no way. The startup costs would be too high. And so it's kind of a partnership that we're in with them right now. And obviously, we've come to rely on them heavily. They rely on us heavily as well. There's no doubt about that. But it's definitely a partnership with the two of us at this point going forward.
Brian, I just want to add one thing. Early conversations between Greg Gardner, who works directly with First Student, are leading in the direction that they feel like their service is going to be better after school as well. So that was the issue. Another issue that we had, in addition to late start time, buses were taking a long time to get to South Campus after school. And right now, we're talking about, a 3:15 load for all buses. Now, that's early conversation with them, and there's some complicating factors with also having to travel to North Campus as well, but they are feeling like they can hit a mark that puts us in a way better position after school. So we're excited about those early conversations, and certainly they'll continue to evolve over the next couple of weeks, but we're hopeful given what they're sharing with us at this point in time.
So I know that there was some information that was in the press about some kind of trackers that they wouldn't share, or are they open to sharing that now?
Yes, through Greg's conversation, I believe that families will have access to that app, and we'll be sharing information with families so that they get that information, can follow along, and then appropriately track timing with their students.
Mm-hmm. So that's essentially, like I said, some of the purchase services, some of the things that are, driving that increase as well. And again, a lot of it's inflation related, and we're going to we see that as well. Supplies, again, about $500,000 going up again, just kind of anticipating for some increased costs with those. Capital projects, as we've already talked about extensively, roughly there's about $9.7 million in this current budget. And the reason that is because, again, of the payments that are coming over still into July, August, September, October of this year for last year's work. And then initially I had put about $5 million in for the summer work for summer of 2023, just as kind of a placeholder, so we could kind of see where we were with that and, where that would all shake out. I don't know if we'll end up spending $5 million. We could be more, we could be less. We'll talk through that. Right now, I think, as I said, we were about $3.5 million, I think, in that ballpark for everything else that we've already approved, and so that's already built into this budget as well. And again, as I put down here, current budget estimates about a $3 million deficit, which was expected when we talked last year in terms of where we would go with some of these projects. going on to page 15, and I'm not going to go into all of the pages of the 5036 form, the state budget form, but really page 15 is what gives you a nice clear picture of what's going on in this current budget. So at the top, you see all the revenues. I break those out by the property taxes, again, that corporate personal property replacement tax, investments, other local sources, which is generally fees, student fees, those types of things. And then evidence-based funding, which is our payments from the state, also state aid categoricals, so payments from the state which include refund or refunding for transportation, and that generally is really what makes up that state aid categorical. And then there's some special ed reimbursements in there as well. And then the federal aid, as I pointed out, which is anticipated to be a little bit higher this year going forward. You see a total there of $93.4 million of revenue. And then on the expenditure side, it's all broken down. Again, you go across the top by the fund, and then each one of the objects, as we call them, salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, capital outlay, other objects. The one item I added this year is non-capital equipment. And the reason we did that is because a recommendation from our auditors last year, we had a lower capital threshold. We were in the area of about $2,500, $2,000 to $2,500, and the auditors said really appropriate levels at this point are $5,000. So we said, okay, so we raised that. But that means that if you have equipment that's, $3,000, where do you place it? That goes into that non-capital equipment line item. So we've moved those around to kind of say, look, we're no longer putting those into the capital outlay expenditure, but going to the non-capital equipment. And so that dollar amount there is what we see. So anyway, ultimately, what we'll do here is, like I said, with about a $3.8 million deficit is what we're looking at. And so what we'll need to do is, over the next month, I'm going to continue working on this, looking at it, trying to solidify some of these numbers, hopefully bring some of them down. That would be great. And kind of go from there. I'd like to think that this was sort of a worst-case scenario initially, and then we'll see what happens. But obviously, also, we talked about the capital projects, too, as well. So that being said, ultimately what we would ask the board to do is approve this tentative budget. What happens then after approval is we advertise it as being on display in the newspaper. It has to be on display for 30 days here in the district office before the final can be adopted in September. We'll also post a copy up on the website as well for anybody who wants to view it that way. And then we have a public hearing at the September meeting on the budget itself, and then adopt the final in September. And then we can always amend it as well going forward through that same process. That being said, I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of this information.
Brian, thank you for this comprehensive walkthrough and comprehensive budget. Just let me confirm a couple elements of my understanding. So the CPI reference is, we've talked about this 6 months ago, shockingly low, right, at 1.4%, and that's because it's a year in arrears, meaning 12 months from now, that number will be likely quite a bit higher than 1.4, which is driving
Yes.
a lot of the revenue.
Next year's tax levy will be 5%.
Yeah, okay.
Which is the highest it's ever been since the tax cap. The previous high was like 4.1, and that was in like 2007 maybe. And so we are capped at the lesser of 5% or whatever the CPI actually is. So 1.4 is driving this year, 5% will drive next year. And right now, most people are saying that December of this coming year is also still going to be another 5% potentially.
Okay, so that'll be a nice pop for a couple of years as you're
Yeah.
predicting. The corporate personal property tax, which you've highlighted again, seems to be the most variable and lately to the good, right? So you're budgeting, it sounds like about 75% of what we saw last year.
75%, right.
Almost 7.8 million. I think
Yeah.
I heard you say we already got in 1 month 1.8.
1.8 in July, and then we just received an August payment. But anyway, we're right around $2 million total right now.
We're on our way.
We're on our way.
That feels like
No
there
doubt.
could be, that could be conservative. I'm staying optimistic and hopeful, but not asking you to change any budgeted numbers.
Right.
Just pointing that out. And then, as you flagged, I think employee benefits from, whether it's here or in the corporate America, I mean, it's the topic of surprise, and I think you articulated some of the drivers for that quite well. And my last I think my last question is around the capital projects, just to make sure we're all clear. You mentioned within the, I think it's 9.7 in the O&M fund capital outlay, there's a portion that is pertaining to invoices and work done last month, this month, next month. Kind
Right.
of, not spillover, but related to things we've already approved, in-flight projects.
That's right.
It's also inclusive of the field house work, 2 million-ish
That's right.
for next summer, so that 2 million's in the 5 million of what you're calling unallocated funds. So I'm thinking about that 2 million plus those 4 projects we talked about earlier for next summer as being all in the budget this time.
So actually, I did not include that 2 million into that 5 million. The 2 million I have
okay.
included in as kind of that prior year number because that was approved in that prior year.
Okay,
So really what we're kind of anticipating here is in this coming year, about $4.8 million of money that would be, or $4.7 million, whatever, of dollars that would be related to the expense from all prior projects, but is going to come into this year. And so then that other essentially, I have just a total of $5 million then allocated to be paid in June of 2023 for projects.
okay.
So ultimately, and then I've broken that one down as well. So let me give you the number there.
I just wondered where, in what year's fiscal budget or results, maybe it's results, historical, would the field house air conditioning project?
And actually, I apologize. I'm looking at my spreadsheet here. I did put 650,000 of that 2 million into the following year. I apologize. So that's why some of that money is still
Okay.
hanging out there from the
And-
prior year.
And some of it will be reflected as being incurred in the most recently closed fiscal year that's under audit?
Correct.
Ah, okay.
That's
okay.
correct.
I didn't know
Yes.
if we,
Yeah. So
it all in the future,
anything that was invoiced through June 30th of 2022 will be reflected in that appropriate financial year last year.
Okay.
And again, that's what I was talking about earlier, where we've had over $2 million worth of invoices come in after June 30th, just on the construction piece alone.
okay.
So that has to be added back into our expense, total expense for last year. And then once that, and I have a spreadsheet that I put together that says, basically, okay, what are the total amount of the contracts? How much have we paid? How much do I have to kick into the next year then for July, August, September payments on the current summer 22 projects? And then I have to take, what is the total cost of what we believe the projects will be next summer, and then take probably about 50 to 60% of that and put that into June.
Okay.
And then I'm combining those two project years into one fiscal year, if that makes sense.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Anyone else? All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And again, as I said, I'm going to continue to work on this. I'm sure that the final in September will look different. I don't think it'll be dramatically different, but certainly as we're able to hopefully solidify some of these other numbers, I'll get a little bit more accurate picture. Although I don't think it's all that.
This does not come back next Monday.
Yes,
It does come back.
it does. We have to adopt the
Presentation.
tentative on Monday night, and then, again, as we go through that process, to adopt the final in September. Yep.
Thanks, Brian. I always think that summary page is so helpful, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. That's helpful for me, too.
So helpful. Thanks for pulling them together.
Well, we are going to take you off the hot seat now.
Right. Thank you all.
We have one agenda item to review under curriculum, and that is the DAOES intergovernmental agreement, second reading. Brian Waterman.
Yeah, so this is the third time the board has seen the proposed intergovernmental agreement with DAOS. Just as a brief reminder, last year, ISB and JCAR approved new administrative rules that simply said any existing career and technical education agreements that existed prior to 2021 needed to be updated by next summer, which is 2023. Just as a reminder, DAOS, or the DuPage Area Occupational Education System, that's Technology Center of DuPage for us. So we send about 40-ish students a year to TCD. The board consists of superintendents from the districts that feed into TCD. And so all last school year, the DAOS board me included, work to update the agreement. The next step in the process is to have all the individual school boards that feed into TCD approve it as well. And so this is the second reading of the updated intergovernmental agreement. So with that, take any questions or thoughts the board
So
has.
it's the second reading, does it come to us next Monday?
So next Monday, it will come back for the final reading, pending approval. Then we would notify TCD and Deos that District 204's board has approved it. They'll put that together with all the other boards that are doing the same thing this summer or spring or early fall, and then eventually it will become approved.
How many students did you say?
40-ish.
Okay.
Yeah, some years, Scott, what's the range? 30 to 50 probably that we've had?
Yeah, we usually go by whether it's one bus or two buses.
Yeah, yeah, so, yeah, that's,
When it gets large enough to go two buses, it's been a while since we've had two buses.
yeah.
Any questions? That was too easy for you. All right, our next agenda items to review are policy. We begin with the Press 109 policy review. Second reading, Ed Petrowski.
Thank you, Vice President Kelly. We do have the second reading of board policy or Press Issue 109. As Dr. Waterman mentioned with the Deos agreement, this is the third time the Board of Education has seen it. There have not been any changes along the way. As a reminder, it's broken into 3 sections. Section 1 includes policies that are being recommended for a 5-year update, review, and renewal. There are 4 policies in that section. Section 2 includes 5 policies that have changes that are of an administrative nature. Those changes do not impact how the policies are interpreted or administered. And as I stated, we have 5 policies in that section. And finally, Section 3 include 2 policies that have been reviewed not only by the Illinois Association of School Boards Council through press, but also our district council as well. Those policies include substantive changes to school code policy or district policy. Those are policies 2230 and policy 7285. As we discussed at prior meetings, policy 2230 is actually a board policy that we recently approved, had reviewed, and created by our district council, and so we've approved. This recommendation is to essentially keep the policy that we just had approved, so we're not recommending any substantive changes, really. And then policy 7285, the changes that are being recommended by our district council are those that make our policy better align with school code statutory requirements, as well as the ISB model policy. None of the recommended changes diminishes the impact of the ISB or school code policy, just better aligns it to what is required by law. And at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
I have one question, not really related to any of these changes, but related to the policy. On the public participation comment policy, in point 1, it says that individuals that provide they are residents will be permitted to speak for individuals that do not identify themselves as residents. So there were a few meetings where we capped out on our public comment session. Do we do that? Do we,
Like meaning prioritize residents
Yeah,
over,
I
yeah,
just-
if they provide so we can't require them to provide the information, but we can ask for it, and if they provide it, then we can prioritize residents over non-residents.
Okay, so if 15 people sign up and they don't put residence information.
Right. Then we would just
We
go.
have no way
right,
of
right.
understanding a way to prior, because, ideally, obviously, we have a discrete amount of time, and it would be great to know that.
Residents were.
That those
Yeah.
people who are from our district. that we have
Absolutely.
The prioritization, so, and can we require people to fill out the form in its entirety, though, can't we?
You can't require them to put their address down.
Not the address, but, okay, I'm not, okay, that's all.
And I remember discussing that with Brian Crowley, our
the-
attorney,
yeah.
all the way back in the fall, asking that question.
I know you can't require them to write their address, but is there some way to say, that,
To identify them as a resident versus non-resident
Yeah.
and require that.
yeah,
I'll go back and check. I'll find out. I know when we went through the address piece, we couldn't require it, but we can, that's a good thing to review.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Our final policy items are the policy review and recommendations for two policies. Policy 7.240 and 7.180. Brian Waterman.
Okay, I would make sure I get that note down. Yes, thank you. So back in the spring, March, April, there was an interest in reviewing board policies related to student behavior, harassment, code of conduct, kind of all the policies that fall under that umbrella. So Carrie had worked with Joby DeDaniels, myself, and at the time it was Kendra Yoke from Franzik. She took another position. So Dana, who is here with us tonight, Dana kind of picked up the baton in probably late May, mid to late May. And really the goal was to see if there were any opportunities around updating board policies related to this area. And so really the first step was for Franzik to really look at best practice, look at other districts' policies, see if there was any opportunities for us to update ours. The policy 720 and 7190, which 720 is harassment of students and 7190 is student behavior. There were no changes or further revisions recommended for those two policies. However, there were some recommendations for policy 7180 and 7240, which is 7180 is prevention of and response to bullying, intimidation, and harassment. So we'll just kind of take this one at a time, and then I'm going to have Dana answer questions or explain a little more. But the two main recommended updates for 7180, the first part is the restorative measures definition part of that policy has been revised to align with the language of School Code, Republic Act 102-241. And then the second part of that allows districts some flexibility when responding to retaliation, false accusations, things like that, and really allows districts the flexibility to suspend or expel students for retaliation against reports of bullying or harassment. So those are the two recommendations for policy 7180. Procedurally, how this would look, this is a first reading, so we're bringing this to the board as a first reading, answer questions, see if there's any follow-up on that, and then we would, of course, in September, bring it back for a second reading for both 7180 and 7240. Dana, anything to add on that one? And then just real quickly on the 7240, again, it's recommended the language be updated to expand the definition of prohibited conduct in our code of conduct to include hazing, harassment, discrimination, bullying, things like that. So that language is also reflective of what Franzik really saw as an opportunity for us to update our language in conduct code.
So just for clarification, because I'm also looking ahead to the next agenda item, clarification of policy, but then what does this mean in action? That seems like that's what is coming in our next conversation from the materials.
Yeah, there's a couple
great.
things. Obviously, it's how do we ensure that what we're doing is reflective of this, but also communication-wise from a handbook. Leslie and Jen are going to talk about this, but the updated handbook also includes references to this policy.
Yep, okay, great.
Which was also a Franzik project.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure that the policy was congruent with the handbook, and so there are references now throughout the handbook that take you back to the policy, which is the document that the board adopted.
Sure.
So prior to, I'm looking at 7240, prior to these recommended changes, there were no provisions for considering, considering how we can handle things like social media. this is our first inclusion of, and nothing in the handbook either, really, or was it in the handbook, but because we didn't have it in the policy?
We've addressed social media incidents before, and we've addressed this type of behavior. It wasn't written into the policy, but I don't know that that really affected our practice that much.
Okay.
I think they sort of IASB avoids social media in the policy because it is sort of a complex case-by-case basis. There's obviously First Amendment rights that are attached to students' use of social media. So there's limitations on discipline if it implicates that First Amendment right. But there's other instances where, you know, the conduct is clearly harassing, it's bullying, it's damaging. And I think the best way to sort of capture sort of that gray conduct is to address it in the extracurricular code of conduct, because then you're removing privileges, you're not looking at deprivation of educational rights. So I think that's why it's not addressed so overtly, but Brian is correct that we do address them all the time and advise other, school districts as well that they can discipline, especially when it has a connection to school and it really impacts another student's ability to access their educational programming and, have a safe climate at school. It's hard to track all of it, though, that being said.
I think what this does help is it makes it more explicit around harassment and bullying, whereas before, it was more related to school consequences. So our code of conduct would address school consequences. So if it didn't say harassment, bullying, intimidation, but if a student was consequenced at school for that, then that automatically became a code of conduct violation.
Okay.
So this just, I think, just adds really more flexibility and more teeth to the policy.
So are we saying then that we're only addressing the social media part in extracurricular activities versus
No, this.
when a student is in extracurricular activities versus?
No, this wouldn't limit you from addressing it through discipline, but I think it just makes it explicit for people participating in extracurriculars that they really need to maintain an appropriate sense of kindness and fairness to their peers on social media. And if they're putting anything out on social media, it just gives you a little bit more of a broad latitude if they put something out on social media. Bullying, harassment, all of that is still prohibited. But like an example might be they put something, about the administration up, right? That maybe you might not be able to discipline them for it because the administration, they're public figures. Students have First Amendment rights to criticize the administration if they'd like to. But say they did it in a very crude way. I think you want the people participating in extracurriculars to know that that is not, appropriate. That's not what we're trying to teach people. That's not how they should, communicate with their bosses at work or if they want to, have a productive adult life. But it doesn't, the bullying and the harassment, it's not in the policy because I'm not sure you could capture that with student discipline. You would capture that through the code of conduct. There are just so many different ways that kids can put bad things up on the internet. Like we could be here, there's things that are lewd, there's things that are, embarrassing to others. There's things that are not true. There's all kinds of things that cause damage. And the very serious ones we can still capture under the discipline policy, even though it's not explicitly stated, because you capture in your discipline policy anything that has a nexus to the school environment. It's sort of these other areas I think you're just trying to improve. I think it goes along with some of the things you teach about social media and responsible digital citizenship. That's where you're reflecting it in that extracurricular code of conduct.
So, okay, so I get that. So the Supreme Court case with the cheerleader who had bad words against the school that I believe she won.
Right.
So is that saying that then a student who is in the extracurricular can still voice their opinion, obviously, about what they feel against like the administration or, which I'm just asking.
No, I actually think that's what exactly the kind of misconduct that would probably be captured by the extracurricular code of conduct. So, I guess that would be a judgment call as to whether you'd want to do that, right? If you'd want to discipline. But I think that's what the extracurricular code of conduct is that if you use bad language or you make disparaging comments about your peers, and even though it might be First Amendment protected speech and you can't be disciplined, we don't have to let you participate in this activity anymore.
I think
We're
historically,
putting
too,
people on notice that to participate in activities, and again, that's something the board might want to discuss. But I do think it does align with, other, digital citizenship curriculum. Certainly, we all have First Amendment rights, but we also have, we have obligations to be professional and respectful and, speak to people directly about problems and perhaps not, post them on the internet or on Snapchat. So, that's a board decision, but that's what the intention is.
But does that go against the Supreme Court decision?
It does not go against the Supreme Court decision. I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question.
I think it's important too, like, we've had discussion on this, but the determination on whether or not we consequence or implement student, accountability for social media and things like that we've never been hindered by policy or procedures. It always comes down to, is there a nexus and do we have evidence that the student did it? That's really what it comes down to. Historically, we've never been really hindered by our policies. Now, this adds more teeth to it and it adds some more explicit language, which is really helpful. But it really always comes down to the individual situation. Do we have proof or evidence that the student did it? And is there a nexus to the school environment? It's really always been about that.
But I think when in discussing this and talking about that, because that was my question, Michael, like, why is it just for extracurricular activities? Why is it not for all? And it was more of, I think Brian had explained it with the nexus and everything like that. It gave more, that was more of the concern. And also, I think you gave numbers about how many kids were involved in extracurricular activities too.
Like 75%, yeah, or more.
So,
So, and our
we should
code of
capture a lot of
conduct
them.
before was basically based on substances, alcohol, drugs. So adding this language to it will do nothing but help.
And and the thought was we wanted to make it more expansive. Do you know what I mean, to put that in there? And my thought, at least when we were in there and talking, was the more expansive and the more leeway, I don't know if that's the right word, but the more discretion for you to have that within something that might not be appropriate was what we were looking for, and that's why it was expanded upon.
This doesn't, so I think, Michael, to your point, this doesn't, guarantee that if to the Supreme Court ruling, if a student criticizes us on social media, that we're going to implement a code of conduct. What it does give us some flexibility to do is if a student is hazing or harassing or bullying or intimidating another student, then this gives us the specific language to address that. But I don't think we would ever want to be outside of a Supreme Court ruling.
Right. Right. There's a different standard for criticizing your,
Yeah.
you would think it wouldn't be a different standard, but it is a different standard. The criticism of like the coach and the teacher, that's different than like
Bullying.
a peer who's, obviously another young person, a lot more vulnerable. I think that's the type of conduct that you're trying to capture. So it wouldn't be violative of the Supreme Court decision.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on?
So procedural, this will come back in September for a second reading, so if there's any other follow-up questions, we can address those.
All right. Thank you, Dana, for being here, too.
Welcome.
Thanks, Dana.
Our final agenda items for this evening are all student services related. This includes a 2021-22 student discipline data overview, 22-23 behavioral expectations information, and 22-23 student handbook review. We will begin with the 21-22 student discipline data overview. Leslie Owens.
Thank you so much, Vice President Kelly. So Dr. Tyrell and I put together this memo that has some information to share about really the behavioral incident reporting for 2 years. And we chose the 2018-2019 school year, which was the last complete year before COVID, and then this past school year, 2021-22, which, you know, in the memo, you'll see post-COVID. We know we're not exactly post-COVID, but students were back in school for the full year, and so we wanted to look at that data and see. Looking at those 2 years too, we know that students did not experience the pandemic in a bubble. There was a lot that was going on, and students are expressing the things that have occurred in different ways, and we're trying to make sure that we are continuing to study that, look at that, see what's going on with our students, take data on that, and make sure that we can respond when students are showing us that they're maybe demonstrating difficulty from the pandemic years or just in general. This is not, you know, data that's new for us to be collecting, but obviously we're kind of looking at it through a different lens after going through such, you know, a huge event that all of our students experienced in different ways. So we chose those 2 years and really wanted to talk through comparing that data and then talking about what we use this data for in terms of, okay, we have this information, how do we proceed so that we're addressing students' needs and addressing some of those discipline issues or handbook issues so that students are aware of what's being expected of them, that they're getting the support that they need, and so on. So the chart, as you can see, compares the 2 school years, all 4 quarters. The 2018-19 school year is on the right side, 21-22 on the left. We've included attendance information as well, because that is information, again, our student support teams have always looked at attendance data, behavior data, grade data, because it's a way for us to kind of, you know, it's that litmus test. How are students doing? What are we seeing? Are there patterns that are happening? Is something anomalous happening that we want to look into, or is it just kind of the normal ebb and flow of student behavior? So that attendance information is really important to us. We know that many students, when, you know, one cut or one absence might not mean a whole lot, but you start seeing a pattern of that, and it can really lead to us understanding that there's more going on for that student. So our grade level student support teams weekly are looking at this data, and we are constantly working to revise how we capture, how we look, and how we study this data across school years, across quarters, to compare and see what might we need to add into our, you know, menu of services, what might we need to adjust in terms of our practices, so that students, again, get what they need. So what we did in terms of this memo is we took kind of those top behavior referrals. The attendance you'll see as a direct comparison, the categories. The behavior referrals, we lined them up side by side, even though they're not in like numerical order on each side, but just to kind of see that direct comparison from the 2 school years, and looked at all of those same referrals. There are some other referrals that we gather information on, actually quite a few others, but these are really the top referrals that we get, and these are some of the ones that are really more concerning in terms of how do we intervene with students, or what is this telling us about what students may or may not be experiencing or going through. So those are the numbers, again, comparing how many reported incidents we had from each of those years. Again, that's kind of an important point, that these are reports that were, or referrals that were made. It may have been from a teacher, it may have been from an administrator or a student assistant, any of our staff, but these are the incidents that were reported to us in those 2 school years. And then one thing to note, you'll see under the 2018-19 school year, there were 2 referrals categories that year that we don't have any longer, and that's the PE no dress and the cheating and plagiarism. We've changed our policy on how we address that, and so it's just no longer a category, but you can see that that made up quite a few referrals, and really looking at that referral data helped us to refine our policies and practices to make sure that, you know, in terms of the PE no dress, there were a myriad of reasons why students were maybe not dressing, and we addressed it in more of a supportive way rather than you're not in your uniform, here's your, you know, referral, and then that's leading to detention or something like that. So those are 2 that we changed. The cheating and plagiarism, our division chairs have worked with the assistant principals to address those concerns immediately within the classroom with the teachers, students, families, and then only if that has to rise to a different level of support or discipline are those treated somewhat differently, but those are really handled within the classroom with the teacher and the student.
So those would go after that if it continued or something, then it would become one of the referrals? Or-
It could, yeah. So we essentially have given students the opportunity to, if they, if there's a situation with plagiarism or cheating, and this has become sort of easier for teachers to recognize given software and things when they turn papers in, there's a way of scanning that. So, but students they always find a workaround somehow, some way. But giving students another opportunity we don't want to punish them academically, but they usually have an opportunity to do an alternate assignment where they wouldn't be able to utilize, that information from the first go-round. And we hope that that takes care of it. Rarely would it then escalate up the chain from there. Any questions? I'll stop there. Any questions on this data or, how we're gathering what we're gathering?
Can you remind us, so we're looking at 18-19 versus 21-22, right? So pretty, 2 school years are not in the middle there. And if I'm looking at the data, right, like the attendance referrals look like they're up 50%. And a lot of them are, some data on tardies. In the older school year, was there a link between exempting a final and no more than 3 tardies or something? Like, was there a motivation to not be, so many things could be happening, right? There could be like, hey, let's report all the tardies, and there'd be a huge focus on teachers reporting tardies. Like, who knows? I have no idea how to make the data comparable, right? Because you've got different people in roles and different areas of focus, but was that the
There
case
was an
for the older year?
attendance component for the final exemption, Scott.
There was years ago, but there wasn't in
Okay.
18-19.
Okay.
It was, by that point, it was just no suspension from school. But I think there was and I wasn't here when that happened, but there was a deliberate reason for removing the attendance piece out of the exemption because kids were coming to school sick.
Bird flu.
Oh, gosh, okay.
What's that?
Okay.
Bird flu.
Oh, bird flu. That's when it was.
Is there,
2009, yeah.
so do we have any thoughts on attendance referrals doubling in that?
I'm going to
I'll jump in.
Okay.
And I was going to share this a little bit later, but I think now's actually the more appropriate time. Throughout the pandemic, we walked away from some of our handbook language around attendance, and it's going to be really important that this year that we recommit to that handbook language.
Okay.
So that's something that I'm sure contributed to a bit of the increase. So if it's okay with everybody, I'll share just some of the things that we're going to do with respect to attendance and tardies going into this school year, because we really believe that now's the right time to commit to not only being in class, we know that that's the best place for all of our kids, but on-time behaviors as well. So we'll be recommitting the handbook language, which means that students will have a limit of 7 parent guardian initiated excused absences from class. Now that doesn't include medical excused absences, or if somebody goes on a college visit. There's certainly documentation that categorizes those absences differently, and they don't count against a student's excused total from a parent guardian initiated absence. Per the handbook, once unexcused absences, and you'll see in the data, there's not a lot of unexcused absences because most everything, as long as we had parent confirmation, counted as an excused absence as we pursued the pandemic. And so now we'll recommit to the language, and unexcused absences are subject to disciplinary consequences. So our assistant principals have spent a lot of time calibrating and talking about their protocols for following up on student tardies and student absences as we start the school year. So there will be consequences issued for unexcused absences. In addition to recommitting to handbook language, we've done a few other things regarding attendance. So over the course of the summer, assistant principals have had proactive meetings with students and families who experienced issues with attendance throughout the course of the year. Now, that's not all kids. We realize that our attendance data is not great from last school year, but those that experienced the most number of absences, real extreme attendance situations, our APs have connected with and had meetings, proactive meetings over the course of the summer to try and engage families before we start the school year. They also have had meetings with families and students who experience some significant disciplinary concerns as well. So we kind of have, the attendance and also resetting behavioral expectations. So really proud of that work that they've done to try and set a positive framework for the year. They've also agreed upon interventions and communications as an AP team. So we've written standard communications that families will receive electronically at absence 4 and 7. Research supports the fact that just like knowing your total number of absences, students and families knowing their total number of absences will help attendance concerns. Like if you had a checklist and you were checking off 1, 2, 3, 4, oh my gosh, I've already been absent 6 times, 7 times, 8 times. So they'll be sending letters at absences 4 and 7. They'll commit to parent meetings around the 8th absence. So when those absences start becoming unexcused, or if somebody has, a significant amount of notes for absences that are before that unexcused mark. Certainly there are good reasons kids are absent, and if there are good reasons and there's medical concerns, our student support teams need to know about that, and we should be connecting with those families as well. They've developed a tool to utilize with kids and families, an individual attendance success plan, which they'll go through when they have parent meetings. And part of that tool will also be talking about some of the privileges that we have as well. So we need kids here, we want them here, and we want them to experience all of the awesome things that we have at LT, but we need them in class. So that tool will be something that they'll use as well. And they're also building in incentives for strong attendance, those students that hit that 95% threshold on a quarterly basis as well. So all of those things will be communicated to families and kids in multiple ways. So we'll be sending email communication, we'll communicate them in our back to school webinar that we have on the 18th. APs will be meeting with students the week of August 29th, and we'll be sharing this with them as well. We'll be sharing this information. It's really important information. We'll be sharing it with our teachers and staff at our Institute Day as well when I share some building leadership updates. With respect to tardies, we have to prioritize on-time behavior. So some of the things that we've done throughout the course of the last several months, we're working collaboratively. Andrew Johannes shared this, I believe, at the June meeting with our LTEA to streamline the process for communicating tardies. It wasn't really an efficient process. Teachers in the past outlined in the handbook, they had to make parent contact via call, which is challenging given the fact that we don't always have phones in classrooms and office spaces that teachers have access to. So we'll be streamlining that and making it more efficient. Email communication. We continue to talk about increasing our presence administratively, and with essays, really a lot is going to happen in the first few weeks. We're going to make sure that we have strong presence before school, after school, during passing periods, and we're going to ask our teachers and our staff to join us in that effort. Promoting on-time behaviors, promoting appropriate hallway behavior, it's all of our responsibilities. And so just setting the framework from the beginning of let's all be in the halls, let's increase our administrative presence, we're working on increasing our essay presence. We're working on hiring right now, but just encouraging kids to get to class. Late starts on Wednesday with the busing, it contributed to this culture where we didn't really have like a timely culture. Certainly we weren't marking kids tardy when they were absent because buses were coming in late, but there was some wandering that occurred and kids were coming in late, and it was a behavior that happened on Wednesday mornings, but I think it bled over into other time as well. So that's going to help a lot. And then something that we're looking at but not going to implement at the beginning of the year is utilizing a scanner tool when kids enter late for first period, rather than having them go to the assistant principal's office to get a pass to go to class. We're going to look at a potential scanning tool to get that information right as kids come in, give them a receipt, and go straight to class. So we're still working on that a bit. And like I said, we're going to share important information with kids, with family, with staff. It really has to be an all-in effort. APs are committing to this as well, along with the rest of our leadership team. And then in a minute, Leslie's going to talk about our SEL lessons on August 22nd and 23rd, and certainly there will be some really important AP information that we share, along with some school safety information that I think will just appropriately set the tone for this school year.
But so to your point about attendance, I know now it was a good thing in respects, but last year students were given mental health days that they some took and utilized, and it seemed to be, you know, maybe some took advantage of.
Sure.
And so I don't know, is that going to happen this year? And did we track how many mental health days that students took as well that were excused? But I think last year, was it 5 days that were given?
They're allowed to take up to 5 mental health days, but we do have a process in place so that we're tracking that. And at day 3, we have a process that triggers a phone call and a conference with the family and the student to make sure, because truly, if someone is needing of mental health days, we have a responsibility to reach out to say, is there something going on and do you need more support? So the SST teams also follow that information week to week, and so they keep their running list of who's used mental health days. They get coded as mental health days. No reason has to be provided. Parents can call and say, my student's taking a mental health day, no further information. But again, from a perspective of ensuring that we are aware of what's going on with our students, offering support where they need it, we do keep track and we do make those phone calls to make sure that we can connect them with the resources if necessary.
And those will count against parent and guardian initiated absences. So if, you know, a family member calls in and says, my daughter's taking a mental health day, okay, no problem. We will keep track of that so that we could have follow-up if there's subsequent mental health days, but it does count as one of their 7 parent guardian initiated absences.
Jen, the tardies, first of all, thanks for the view to this information and for providing it. I think it's super important and it's really appreciated. More importantly, thanks for all the input about how you're addressing things and creating positive solutions to make school all that it should be for our kids when they're here.
Thank you.
You talked a lot about the outreach that would happen because of attendance issues. Is there, when I look at kind of the increased percentage of the kids, a 303% increase in kids that had 7 or greater tardies during the course of the year, is there likewise an outreach? Because I've heard parents say, I had no idea my student had multiple tardies last year. Is there outreach at some point that you're tracking that will toggle some sort of outreach to home?
Yes, and we're still working on all of the details, but parents will get email communication every tardy. So every tardy, you know, if my child's tardied 7 classes in one day, we believe right now the way that the communication structure will work is that parent will get 7 emails. I kind of like that because I feel like, okay, you know, here you go, period 1, 2, 3, give me a call, we'll try to get it fixed. Exactly. So that's one aspect. There are we will have AP conferences with kids as well. You know, the other thing that we want to promote, instructional time is precious. We want kids in class at the start of the period so that they can experience our amazing teachers for the entire duration of the class. And so they're not disruptive to other kids that are in class. And so promoting on-time behaviors, you know, super important, and just really like communicating it in a positive sense. Instructional time is so valuable. And the other thing that we're going to empower our staff is there's times that kids need to leave class because they need to use the restroom or because there's an emergency or they just have to go see somebody at that moment in time. But we also know that there can be patterns of kids leaving class as well. And so we're going to empower our staff to work with our students to get them to stay in class and keep them in class. And if they need additional support from our administrative team or our assistant principals, we're going to support our staff in communicating and working with kids and families as well. So super important that there is outreach on attendance, on tardies, on prioritizing instructional time because it's so valuable. And the research says if kids are in class, they're just going to do better. So it'll be it has been throughout the course of the summer, a major focus of building leadership team's conversations. I'm very proud of our AP's efforts and the things that they're committing to as we start the year. And, you know, we're looking for incremental progress. You know, this is recommitment to handbook language that we've walked away from. And so do I expect these interventions and communications and tools that we implement this year to completely level the playing field and go back to 18-19 data? Perhaps not, right? But we need to move in the right direction, and we think we have some steps in place to move us in the right direction in the coming year.
question along those lines too,
Sure.
because it's come up in various meetings and it's related, is hallway presence. Is there a conversation about increasing that between classes or right before and after school? Because I think there, maybe anecdotally was, reports that it wasn't as much as it used to be perhaps, and the data might support that. Like you said, kids will wander,
Yeah.
take their time.
Jill, I think it's super important. It's important that we have a collective presence in the halls, and that's going to be something that we're going to talk with our staff about as we come back. It's already something that we've talked about administratively. We're going to have an increased presence administratively before and after school and during passing periods for the first few weeks. Not to say that we won't after, but we know we have to set the right tone, and inviting our staff to participate, to step out in the halls. I mean, there's a lot of powerful things that happen when our teachers are in the halls, connecting with kids, welcoming kids, talking to kids, redirecting kids. So absolutely, it's something that we'll talk with our staff about when they return, and we think it's a really important part of the plan to set the right tone for the school year.
Great, thank you. Thanks for addressing all of this need.
Welcome.
Any other questions about any of the data on the chart or categories?
I have some questions.
Sure.
So I love all the positivity and like the hopes to move forward, to make it better. What is the breakdown of the different students? Because you have from the total, is it the same percentage of students that it's happening to, or do you have more students coming in? That might be really something interesting to look at.
Sure. We have some of that information, and we can certainly share that. I didn't prepare that for this particular memo, but we certainly look at this, in total and aggregate to say what are our sweeping trends. Attendance is a sweeping trend,
But
for
is it
sure.
just with almost the same, is it with 10% of the kids
Right.
in 2018, 19, and then this year it's with 30% of the
Sure.
population or something
Sure.
like that?
And like I said, we look at that as like the sweeping trend, but then we do distill that down to, okay, if there were 400 tardies, were those tardies from 20 students, or was that 400 students? And then we start kind of going down into those funnels to really dig into what supports are necessary. Are they school-wide supports that Dr. Tyrell just mentioned, some major changes to presence in the hallway, adherence to attendance policies, or are we talking about 10 students who need a deeper dive in terms of getting
That's what I'm
that
wondering, is
support?
it like, because when you compare this, then when we did with the, when we looked at the mandatory reporting and like to cure for the suspensions and expulsions, how does this impact this? Because it sounds like a lot of the interventions you're doing kind of overlap with that.
Sure.
So I guess my question then comes back to how much of the population is impacted?
We can
or is it
certainly
just more within the
yes.
same students?
Yes, and we can certainly share that, but just know for tonight, we look at both of that. We look at how many individual students are having the concerns, and then how many individual incidents or how many occurrences are happening. So we're looking at it both ways to make sure that, again, we're providing, it really goes back to that, multi-tiered systems of support and making sure that all students are getting some layer of attention, or this is being addressed for all students, but then who needs additional support on top of that, and that we're not, working with students who don't need that support because they're already adhering to all the behavior policies and attendance policies, but who might need some additional support.
And I would just add to what Leslie shared, to your point, Jill, and I think this is important data for us to think about. Semester 1 of last year, the percentage of students with 0 or 1 behavioral referrals, 90%. Semester 2, just right under 90%. So 90% of our students have 0 or 1 behavioral referrals. It's pretty powerful data. Now, we could dig in further, and we drilled down.
I mean, that was for last year.
Yes, correct.
Right, but I would be curious to see, like, for that same number that you just said, what was it for 2018, 2019?
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, we can grab that.
That's actually a really popular metric that you see on a lot of district dashboards for strategic planning, which is, it's one that we are very early as we're drafting out the metrics to use. That's one of the ones we're considering adding, which basically is a percentage of students who don't have a referral or have
I guess,
0
so
or
that's
1
like the
referrals.
better language to put. That's what I'm curious. Is it the percentage of students increasing, I'm trying to say it right, the percentage of students increasing, or is it the incidences
Are
Increasing.
increasing.
right? Does
I'd
that,
probably pull the 18-19 data on that too,
For sure,
right?
we can.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we can do
just to
that.
see where, is it just,
For sure.
just to kind of get a different snapshot of it? Thanks.
No problem. Just to give everyone an idea of how this data has shaped our practices and some of the interventions that we have put in place, or some of the things, I guess, for lack of a more specific word, that we've put in place. This type of data that we have looked at, again, it goes well beyond or well before the 2018-19 school year, but it has led us to adding lunch study halls for students and supports rooms offered during that time so that students are getting intervention during the day or have that opportunity. Having testing centers available so that students can make up tests with ease and not have to come before or after if they're unable to do so. We have used feedback from this information to work with our organizations that we partner with, Rosecrans. We're seeing upticks in tobacco use, alcohol use. Here's that information. What can you do as a partner of ours to help with our students who may be struggling? Credit recovery opportunities, so not included in this, but partner to this is the academic information. So looking at what credit recovery is necessary so that students are still moving through their 4 years of high school feeling success and not getting kind of swamped and feeling like this is a lost cause and I'm done. So that the credit recovery and opportunities for students in the summer to make up credits or stay on track has come from this. Expansion of student services, adding our new counselor, new social worker, restructuring, adding in our new assistant division chair, even our support dogs, looking into different ways of supporting students. That has all come from this type of data and problem solving around who needs help, how do they need help, what type of help can we provide, linking our families with referral GPS and having a way for families to get support that goes beyond the school day when necessary. And then our counselors and our social workers use this data to figure out what type of skill building groups that they may run. So those are typically shorter term skill building groups if students are having issues with executive functioning, or sometimes we find that there's a cohort of students that have all suffered loss or grief within the last few years, and we can pull a group together. So that helps us decide who needs help, how can we best serve students, and what do we need to provide. And then the addition of our SEL lessons to freshman PE, that's something that Kurt Johns, our division chair for PE, has worked really hard with his staff, and we continue to look for ways to expand that so that all students, again, are getting a certain level of social and emotional learning and exposure to those concepts. And then we'll move into talking about what's coming up for us in the next couple weeks when we bring students back. So as we've been talking about wanting to provide students with information and give them the best chance for a successful school year, we started this last year where we created a set of universal lessons that all of our students will go through or went through on the first day of school. And we call them SEL lessons, but it's a little bit of a combination of some different things. We simply start by giving students the tools they need to be able to log on to their computers, make sure they can log in, have teachers guide them through that. It seems like a simple thing, but that is, the tool they use for all of their classes, all of their work. If they're not sure how to do that, we can't really get much further. It's our opportunity to reset behavior expectations. So again, this year is an important year for us. We're making some small changes or recommending some small changes to the handbook for this year, but we're going to be looking at that more on a larger scale for next year. And the first thing we know is that we need students to understand those expectations very clearly. We have to provide them that information before we can hold them accountable to that information. So having the opportunity for our APs and teachers to walk through that for every student, including that social media piece in our handbook, what does that mean to students, and making sure they know that's in there. They're not going to memorize the handbook, certainly, but to know that these are the things that are important to us as a school community and that they need to know what the expectations are, that's number one. After that, we can start intervening and providing more support, but we've got to give everybody that same foundation. So we'll be going through digital citizenship with them, and then a variety of SEL lessons. So really that focuses on, we know that one of the most important things we can do in schools to make our school safe and welcoming and a place where students want to be is to start developing those relationships among their peers, with their teachers. And so that is the focus of our first couple days of school. We set aside, a little bit of the books and the syllabus talk for a few minutes to say, we want to learn who you are, we want you to get to know your classmates, and we want to start the school year off on a really positive note where everybody's at the same starting level. We have new students coming in from our, associate schools. We have new students coming at all grade levels from different schools. And so we feel like that's been a really powerful way for us to ensure that every student is hearing the same thing. And we stack those lessons so that each period it's a different topic, so nobody's getting a repeat. If you're in first period, every first period class does the same lesson and so on. So it's been an effective way for us to roll out a lot of information to all 4,000-ish students, and for teachers to be aware of all that information so they know exactly what students have given, and that helps them to create that classroom atmosphere of the same expectations. Jen, I didn't know if you want to add more to that.
The only thing that I would add is something that we're going to include this year, we feel really good about, is our two of the programs from the Sandy Hook Foundation. So Youth Violence Prevention Program, Start with Hello and Say Something. We feel like this is the year to share all of that information with students right out of the gate. So instead of just, launching right into the getting to know you icebreaker inclusion activities, really grounding that first period in Start with Hello, that's a research-based program and really talks to kids about inviting others in, making that connection, looking at social isolation and connecting with their peers as well. Those are programs that work in schools, so utilizing that language with our students right out of the gate is really important to us as well. So that'll be day one, connections, relationship building, say something to start the day, and then setting frameworks for building classroom norms and expectations will occur within the first couple of days as well. We know that's super important. So Leslie and Kurt Johns have done a lot of work and will continue doing work over the course of the next week or so on these lessons, but really important to give kids tier 1 access to this information at the start of the year. And August 24th is going to come quick when the syllabi come out and course expectations, and that's good. That's good because students need to know what we expect from them from a behavior standpoint. We want to support them from a social emotional standpoint, and we want to make sure that they're really clear on their academic expectations as well.
Absolutely. There were some handbook changes. Jen, did you want to go through those?
Sure. So I put a few bullets. We put a few bullets in the memo. Fransit completed a legal review, so we worked with Dana and her team on that. The handbook was reorganized, table of contents updated, as Leslie shared briefly. Not a lot of updates. We will do a comprehensive review of our handbook this year, but a few updates. References to our board policy have been included where applicable throughout the handbook. There were updates made to administering medicines to students, which is page 49 and 50 of the handbook, and 155 and 156 of the packet, and sexual harassment, which is page 30 of the handbook. And really those updates are so that the sections align to our board policy. And then I went through some of the attendance updates that our team made over the course of the summer as well. And then, as we talked about previously, there were updates made to the code of conduct as well that's included within the handbook, and I included that language for all of you to review as well. With respect to handbook and code, we will be finalizing things, and if the handbook is approved, we will be sharing that with families and students prior to the start of the year, asking them to review that handbook. Certainly our APs, when they meet with all of their students, will go through important handbook updates and changes with them, but then we'll be asking parents and students to review the handbook and code of conduct over the course of about a week to 10 days, and then in a lunch study, we'll be asking students to sign off that they've reviewed the handbook in agreement to follow the handbook as well. So that's our plan for following up on that as well. We're also working on a co-curricular night promo video that John Grunke is sharing some updates to the code of conduct as well. So that's another resource that we'll be sharing with families as well.
And just the last piece to add is that we will be, Jen and I will be co-leading an effort to create a committee that will look at the handbook comprehensively and be bringing recommendations to the board for spring, this upcoming spring 23 for the next school year. So Senate Bill 100 guides us, and just kind of our philosophy is wanting that stakeholder involvement, and so getting students, parents, and staff, administration as part of that committee to really take that comprehensive look, make sure that our, we have the policies now that correspond. How do our practices and the things we do when there are difficulties or issues, how do those relate, and do we need to update anything? So that will be the work of a committee that Jen and I will chair over the next 6 to 8 months, and then bring that back to the board to describe those changes and look for approval there.
We've not historically had the board consider and approve the handbook, so we'd like to start that practice now. So it does feel a little rushed to do it before this school year. But then to Leslie's point, we'll be able to do a more substantive update, and we want to bring next year's handbook back to the board like March. That way there's way more time before the school year. So kind of starting this now and then building a better process moving forward.
I just have a question about the handbook. Thanks for all the work to make it good. I know we kind of had talked about, I think maybe Brian, it was in our meetings that we had talked about the policy, about making a hyperlink within the handbook to refer to the policies, but I know it was a really big project, but this was for the online one?
So I think that was where we talked about making the handbook interactive. We're not there yet. So right now, it's all the policies are referenced, but to create an actual link to it, that might have to be something we do down the road.
Okay, I mean, that's a lot to accomplish, but I know we had talked about that, and I think that would be like great to see.
Same thing with like the academic program, but we'd love to get to a point where it's
That's
not
certainly
just
something that.
right now, it's just a standard PDF that we're going to share as a link, but getting to a point where that's more interactive would be great.
Because I just think, like, especially throughout last year, I mean, I know we probably can't accomplish it for this time, but, you know, like, throughout, like, when people were referring to policies and things like that, it's really great to be like, let me hit on it and take you right to that, rather than someone may not know how to access those policies.
And we may even, initially, we won't get there, but we're also going to look to, in addition to having a link to a PDF, we're going to look to build it out on our website as well, so that
That's why I think it had to
translation.
be into it, right.
Yep, so that, you know, it can be translated off of the website. So as we pursue the course of the year, we might be able to look at adding some of those hyperlinks in if we have it on our website, which is our goal.
Because I think that, obviously, you can't do that in the PDF.
Right.
But I know when we were talking about it on the website, that was something just to have that reference, just to be like, oh, that's interesting. I never,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, because as a layperson, you may not know where to get that.
I was gonna say just, and I know you have a team that's working on all of this, so for PDFs, to build it out on your website, not just for translation, but PDFs are not accessible. So like a
Yep.
screen reader can't read it. It also will help you meet your ADA standards too, just for any PDF, but in particular this one.
Yeah, we're working on that.
Yeah.
What we hope to have, before we share the link out to the handbook with kids and families before the start of the year, we're hoping to have it built out on the website. It'll just take us a bit potentially to get the hyperlinks, but we realize to have the most accessible handbook, that's the best method. So we're looking at that.
Awesome.
So on the graduation requirements, there's a question. It says earn a passing grade on the test covering the Constitution of the State of Illinois and United States of America. So it seems like we haven't been doing that over the last couple of years.
Right, the civics course replaces that, and so,
So in civics is where that happens. For the state of Illinois and the Constitution?
correct, the civics course replaces that requirement.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to have it since you have the civics course.
Correct.
So then will we take that out?
What page is that on?
It's
can
on,
make a
well,
note.
14 or 120 here.
120. Okay. Let me
Yeah,
just-
we can
me make a
clarify
note of
that.
that.
It's, we can clarify that.
So page 120, you said?
Yeah, well, it's 14 or 120, one of the.
Oh, 14.
Under
got it. I
H,
got it.
right?
Yep.
You're looking under H on
Yeah,
page
under
14?
H.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, we can clarify that. Page 14.
I just want to add that while I'm sitting here, might be the pain meds, but I've been beaming, and you can't see that, but I wanted to say thank you, Leslie, Jen, and team for working on this continuously through the summer, and I know that this is a big step in the right direction, especially because this has been the first time this has been brought to the board, and trying to kind of, back to even Joe's point about bringing the links and getting things live and making all the connections so that the communication is much more clear and much more accessible for everybody. So I really appreciate that you're putting that time and effort into it. And I love the idea that there's going to be a committee working on taking this to another level and getting other input from our student constituents. And so I really appreciate that. I appreciate working with Forensic on this. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. I'm also very excited about how you're looking at shaping the first few days of school. I'm very excited about hearing about Faith Club and a couple of the other initiatives that you're, the save lessons, I should say, not the club, but talking about some of those save exercises that are really important for our students to have access to. So thank you for listening and hearing from other people too in the community about what we can do to level set expectations around how we will continue to be an inclusive school environment for our students. And I really, really appreciate the work.
Thank
you.
Any other questions, thoughts? That's the one thing I would agree with Carrie completely. I'm so I'm regenerized or excited about what I'm hearing from the plan for the first couple days and the plan going forward. I think it's really exciting. Get back to it. So it's great.
We're excited too.
At this time, we will begin the non-agenda related portion of our public comments. Marilyn, do we have any non-agenda related comments? Okay, so that concludes our meeting. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Table of contents.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Okay, thank you for everyone for coming.
Everyone.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.